Hey everyone, welcome to another adventure. Today, Audio Novel presents Police in Los Angeles by the amazing Mutter. Supporting talented authors like Mutter is what keeps these incredible stories alive. Be sure to check out their Patreon or join their Discord, links are in the description. And if you love audiobooks like this, visit my Patreon for more. Your support helps bring these stories to life. Thanks for being part of this journey. Let's dive into the story. Chapter 101, Valentine's Mishap, Part 3. A female detective in her 30s strode into the house, her voice preceding her arrival. What's the situation? Angela, seemingly familiar with her, turned and replied, Detective Calderon, we just arrived. She didn't get to finish her sentence before being rudely interrupted. Why is he still here? This is a crime scene, and he's a suspect. Jack, who was examining the body, looked up at the detective. She had a similar complexion to Angela's, clearly Latina, and appeared to be around the same age, though she was shorter and not particularly striking. Angela, her irritation evident, still responded respectfully, Yes, ma'am, we were just about to. No need. I'll handle this. You all go canvass the area. Detective Calderon cut her off again, then turned her back on the three and walked towards the grieving husband. Angela's anger was visible, her neck was turning red, and her eyes were fierce. Jack quickly stood up and, with John, they maneuvered her out of the house before things escalated. As patrol officers, they had to respect detectives, but conflicts between departments could be tricky. Angela's status as a trainee detective was still uncertain. Though she had passed the exams and often assisted in the detective squad, she was technically still a patrol officer. Any conflict with the detectives could jeopardize her future. What's the deal with that detective? Do you have history with her? John asked Angela outside. I have no idea. We hardly interacted in the detective squad, Angela replied, rolling her eyes in frustration. Maybe it's because you and Wesley are always showing off your relationship. And today is Valentine's Day. Jack joked, trying to lighten the mood. An hour later, they regrouped to share their findings. They had a general direction on the case, but solving homicides wasn't their jurisdiction. They had to report their leads to the detective in charge. Angela approached Detective Calderon again. We finished canvassing. Neighbors reported seeing a suspicious car driving slowly down the street around 11 a.m. John added, the house at the corner said it was a blue sedan, one they hadn't seen before. So? Detective Calderon shrugged, looking unimpressed. Angela hesitated, this is a dead-end street. It's unusual for unfamiliar cars to be here without a reason. Detective Calderon retorted, that's useless information, Officer Lopez. We already have our prime suspect. The husband. Jack glanced at the middle-aged man being escorted to a police car, blood still smeared on his face and neck from his earlier grief-stricken embrace with his wife. Police have been called to their home at least 6 times for domestic disputes over the past 3 years. Detective Calderon pulled out an evidence bag. I found this withdrawal slip in the victim's wallet. Mrs. Cook withdrew $100,000 from their joint account this morning. I suspect she was planning to leave her abusive husband, and he found out and stopped her. And the money? Angela asked. Not found yet. He might have hidden it, or she might have hidden it intending to return for her belongings. Either way, you're dismissed. Detective Calderon turned to leave, but Angela stopped her. I think we should still check out that car. The detective's patience snapped, I'm the one handling this case, Officer Lopez. If I need someone to clean up my mess, I'll let you know. With that, she left, leaving the trio fuming. You guys will help me, right? Angela turned to Jack and John. Jack shrugged, just make sure Wesley brings a good bottle to the party tonight. John, looking thoughtful, said, but isn't it possible the husband did it? In cases like this, the husband is the perpetrator 60% of the time. Jack opened the car door and reminded John, remember that domestic violence case you handled on your first day? Point taken, John mimed zipping his lips and got into the passenger seat. Let's split up. We'll go to the bank to find out about Mrs. Cook's withdrawal, then meet back at the station to check for any similar burglaries in the area, Jack suggested to Angela. I'll look into that blue car and see if any cameras caught the license plate, Angela said as she drove off. Jack couldn't be sure Angela's lead on the car was correct, but he was certain Detective Calderon's approach was flawed. The husband's behavior didn't fit that of a killer. Ordinary people rarely had such convincing performances, especially in spontaneous, unguarded moments. The only visible injury on the victim was a fatal head wound. Her exposed skin showed no other signs of abuse, contradicting the domestic violence narrative. Moreover, the skin fragments under the victim's nails indicated she had scratched someone before dying. Jack had closely observed the husband. Aside from fresh bloodstains, he had no scratch marks. This case wasn't complex. With some resources and time, they could uncover the truth. Jack was more interested in Detective Calderon's odd reaction. "John, did you find Detective Calderon's attitude towards Angela strange?" Jack mused. "Huh." John looked puzzled. "Isn't that just how girls are with each other? One minute they want to kill each other, the next they're best friends." "Damn, you have a point," Jack thought, momentarily speechless. Then he gathered his thoughts. "I mean, didn't it seem like she looked at Angela as if she were a traitor?" John slapped his forehead, nodding. "You noticed that too?" "She did seem very disappointed, like Angela had let her down." Chapter 102, Valentine's Mishap, Part 4. "I bet that teller who served Mrs. Cook earlier definitely drives a blue sedan." As they walked out of the bank, John had already cracked the case. His acting was terrible. "I've never seen such a nervous suspect," Jack commented, looking equally disappointed. "Let's head back to the station. We need to tighten up the evidence chain. That guy thinks he can hide the scratch marks by turning up his collar and rolling down his sleeves. This case is just too boring." Back at the police station, they parked the car and decided to enter through the main entrance to pass by the front desk and say hi to Lucy, possibly even set up plans for the evening. They noticed a familiar figure, a charming blonde woman, who was asking Lucy about a certain Officer Nolan. "Do you know him well?" The blonde was trying to pry information from Lucy. Somewhat well." Lucy forced a smile. "He seems like a really nice guy," the blonde hinted suggestively. Jack noticed Lucy was on the verge of breaking. "He's okay, I guess." Lucy's eyes drifted as if recalling some past events. "He saved my life," the blonde said, her lips trembling slightly, her expression distant. Lucy managed an awkward yet polite smile just as Jack coughed to get her attention, pointing out John, who was attempting to sneak away through a side door. "Oh, he's here!" Lucy exclaimed, relieved. The blonde turned around, eyes sparkling with delight. "Oh, hey. What brings you to the station?" John, who had been trying to slink away, straightened up abruptly, feigning surprise. "You should be resting at home." The blonde blushed, her face lighting up as if she had just seen her knight in shining armor. "The hospital gave me a thorough checkup, found nothing wrong, so I thought I'd drop by the station on my way home." Jack moved over to Lucy's side and waggled a box of cookies at her. They shared a knowing smile and started munching, watching the scene unfold. "Thanks to you, it's just a minor skin burn," the blonde gently poked John on the shoulder with her finger. Jack thought if given enough time, someone could probably dig a 50-square-meter basement in the station with just their toes. "Oh, that's great. I'm glad you're okay." John's fake smile was so forced it gave the cookie-munching spectators goosebumps. "Oh, and I brought you some gifts. Just some muffins. You can share them with your colleagues." The blonde glanced over at Jack and Lucy, who were happily devouring cookies at the front desk, and gave them a friendly smile. They both waved back, smiling in return. "Wow, that's really kind of you. Very thoughtful, but really, it's not necessary. Seriously, you should head home and get some rest." John's smile was starting to freeze on his face. "Maybe you can come by my place later," the blonde said, her eyes lingering, lightly biting her lip, looking at John with hope. Jack and Lucy exchanged exaggerated glances, their mouths forming an O shape. Well. I'm still on duty for a while, and I already have." John stammered, unsure of what to say. "That's okay. Good men are hard to find. I understand. Anyway, thank you." The blonde seemed a bit disappointed but politely excused herself, leaving behind a large basket of muffins. 2 boxes of Patagonias. "You still have time to back out," Jack teased again, hinting at a bribe. "Muffins are mine." I'll make sure everyone gets one. Wow, they're heavy. Lucy tried to lift the basket but almost hurt her back from its weight. Shut up, you two. She was just being nice, thanking me for saving her. John, embarrassed, turned and hurried off. Hee hee, for now, it's just 2 boxes. By tonight, you might be begging me to take them, Jack said, chasing after John. The two chuckled and walked into the office area, where they saw Angela had already compiled a thick stack of files on the desk. Angela, I think we're ready. John began, but before he could finish, Detective Calderon stormed over, demanding angrily. Lopez, I heard you've been looking into the robbery cases. Yes, ma'am. Angela stood up, facing Calderon directly, her expression calm but her eyes burning with anger. I told you not to investigate, didn't I? Calderon raised her voice, drawing the attention of everyone around. John hesitated, but Jack pulled him back. Angela wasn't someone who could be easily pushed around. Being publicly challenged like this, she would definitely fight back. Helping her sort through the case details would be more beneficial than trying to win an argument here. Jack picked up the stack of files on the desk and began going through them while still listening to the heated exchange between the two women. Yes, ma'am, Angela repeated, her face showing a defiant look. Let me put it this way. Those records you dug up, I reviewed them long ago. They don't prove anything. Calderon stepped closer, their eyes locked in a tense standoff. I thought you were just sleeping with the enemy. I didn't realize you had joined them and started working against us, Calderon spat out. What on earth is she talking about? Jack was puzzled. He looked at John, who shrugged, equally confused. Angela, however, understood immediately. Sleeping with the enemy? Are you targeting me because of Wesley? Calderon smirked as if to say, finally, you get it. Joanna Kelly, murdered last year on her way home from school. We spent months nailing the suspect, only for your boyfriend to find a procedural flaw and get him released. Angela almost laughed in frustration. If you had done your job perfectly, he wouldn't have had any procedural grounds to exploit, would he? She turned and grabbed the files from Jack's hand. Besides, there are 3 other robbery cases, all near today's murder scene, with witnesses seeing a blue sedan leaving the area. Calderon's defiant stance weakened a bit, but she still clung to her argument. That doesn't prove anything. Angela let out a derisive snort. Then how about the fact that all the victims withdrew large sums of cash from the same bank on the day they were robbed? Chapter 103, Valentine's Mishap, Part 5. John seized the opportunity to drive his point home. In fact, we've already visited the bank. One teller seemed very suspicious. Jack and I are nearly certain he's the perpetrator. I suggest we compare the interactions of the victims from the other 3 robbery cases to see if they dealt with this teller when withdrawing their money. Jack added with a sly grin, delivering the final blow. We can also check with the coroner. I noticed at the crime scene that the victim had defensive wounds, indicating they fought back. The suspect likely left DNA under their fingernails. And the teller we saw had obvious scratch marks on his neck and arms, not something left by a cat. We also got confirmation from the bank's parking lot security guard, after treating him to some cookies, that the teller drives a blue Honda, Jack continued. Detective Calderon's face turned red with embarrassment. She grabbed the stack of files from Angela, muttered, I'll verify this, and hastily retreated. Angela beamed and high-fived John and Jack in celebration. With the issue temporarily settled and a couple of hours left before their shift ended, Jack swiped a few muffins from Lucy and went back on patrol with John. These muffins tasted pretty good, reminding Jack of a type of cookie he had eaten as a child called Evergreen, which had a blend of almond shortbread flavor. However, their Valentine's Day was far from over. With less than an hour left in their shift, the dispatch call came through once more. 7A26, we have a reported home invasion. A female caller is locked in the bathroom, stating there is an intruder in her home. 7A26 responding, en route, John replied, picking up the radio. Jack stuffed the remaining muffin into his mouth, expertly switched on the siren, checked the traffic behind them, and executed a sharp U-turn, drawing gasps from pedestrians as they headed to the scene. 10 minutes later. Almost choked, Jack muttered after gulping down half a bottle of water to clear his throat. Not wanting to waste any time, he got out, drew his Glock, checked the magazine, and contacted dispatch again. 7A, 26 on scene. Inform the resident to stay in the bathroom and not to come out. In truth, Jack felt a bit conflicted. One of the strangest things about this world was how often low-level patrol officers like him encountered major cases involving gunfire and high stakes. His shooting skills were now so honed that he could easily score a headshot, which often landed him on administrative leave. In just over 6 months as a cop, he had taken 2 months of leave due to shooting incidents, a situation everyone around him seemed to take in stride, even though it was anything but normal. But when the time came to shoot, he would shoot. After all, administrative leave was sweet. He was already itching to use some of his savings to convert his basement into a gun room, just like in those Hollywood movies where a push of a button would reveal glass cases full of impressive weaponry. Positioned on either side of the door, John and Jack exchanged glances. John held his gun ready as Jack slowly turned the door handle. With a click, the door swung open to reveal a typical small LA bungalow. The house, with its 7 or 8 rooms, was neatly kept. They searched upstairs and downstairs but found no signs of a break-in. Even the master bedroom showed no evidence of disturbance. Perplexed, they exchanged looks. Jack approached the master bathroom and knocked on the door. Police. We've checked the whole house. It's empty. You can come out now. There was a rustling sound from inside, and then the door slowly opened. Jack's eyes widened in surprise, and John's gaze darted nervously, unsure where to look. Standing before them was the alluring blonde woman, heavily made up and wearing a skin-tight, floral mini dress with cutouts that left little to the imagination. Ignoring Jack entirely, she sashayed forward, her hips swaying seductively, and draped her arm over John's shoulder. "Officer Nolan, it's you rescuing me again. Should I leave?" Jack holstered his gun and began tiptoeing backward. John was dumbstruck, fumbling awkwardly with his Glock, trying and failing several times to holster it. "There's still 7 minutes left before our shift ends. If you hurry, you might have enough time." Jack teased, turning to sneak away, but John grabbed him just in time. This was no longer a matter of a few boxes of cigars as hush money. If Jack bolted, even with his body cam on, John would be left in an indefensible position. Unlike a deserted stretch of interstate where a highway cop could get away with fooling around with a speeder without any consequences, this was not the place for such shenanigans. John managed to diplomatically usher the woman back into the living room and had her sit down. "Your false alarm has legal consequences." Jack began his stern lecture, trying to keep a straight face as his mind replayed the absurdity of the situation. Not only had she delayed their end-of-shift plans, but her voluptuous figure had also left a lasting impression on his psyche. Worse yet, this was the first time a woman had completely ignored him while he was with John. It wasn't a false alarm. "I heard someone inside," the woman insisted, still attempting to defend herself. "Oh, just coincidentally when Officer Nolan happened to be on patrol nearby. I bet if I checked your phone, I'd find an app tracking police patrols. You waited for an opportunity, saw us in the vicinity, and then made the call," Jack accused. He hadn't known about such apps until John had inadvertently mentioned them while discussing a setup involving the Southern Front. It was time for the good cop, bad cop routine, and Jack willingly took on the role of the bad cop. This woman needed to understand the gravity of her actions, or John would be endlessly harassed in the future. Seasoned cop Tim had plenty of stories about dealing with such situations, and everyone had heard them. Seeing the woman fall silent, John's natural inclination to play the good cop kicked in. His quick scan of the living room had already given him an idea of the situation. "Let me handle this," John said, and Jack nodded, stepping aside. He didn't want to be too harsh either. The items by the fireplace had caught his eye during their search. There was a folded American flag in a wooden frame and several medals. "Is that your husband?" John asked, looking away from the mantelpiece. "Yes," the woman replied, her demeanor darkening. "Killed in action." John continued. The woman nodded. "It happened just a year ago. Since then, I've been living in a daze, until today." Chapter 104, Valentine's Mishap, Part 6. The blonde woman's smile returned as she stood up and stepped closer to John. "That moment when you saved my life today, it made me feel alive again. It's like you brought meaning back into my life. Do you know what that means to me?" John's brows furrowed as he met her gaze seriously. It's just an adrenaline rush from the rescue, it has nothing to do with me. Honestly, I'm flattered by your affection, but I already have someone in my heart, John said, glancing over at Jack, who nearly choked on his muffin. Was this the right time to be looking at him? Jack quickly caught on and raised a hand as if swearing an oath. Oh, yes, his college girlfriend. John's planning to propose to her soon. I can vouch for that. The blonde forced a smile. Well, I wish you happiness. As John turned to leave, he looked back and added, take care of yourself. Leaving the widow's home, Jack started the patrol car, ready to head back to the station and clock out. I think even if you stayed to comfort her a bit, Gaylis would understand, Jack couldn't resist teasing. 2 boxes of Cuban Patagonias, please, let's not talk about this, John pleaded. I meant comforting in the literal sense, Jack said, trying to keep a straight face. Unexpectedly, John shook his head firmly this time. I can't help her. No one can. What she, Denise, needs is to find her way out of this on her own. Well, it seemed John had at least an entry-level understanding of psychology now. Let's hope your crazy admirer stops here, Jack remarked, unwittingly setting another flag. Back at the station, they clocked out. Jack made an excuse to go home and grab some seasoning, first dealing with Justin's therapy session, then catching up with Chris. On his way to the supermarket, he stuffed his car's trunk with groceries. This made him think, while his kit was flashy, its trunk was too small. Maybe he should consider a more practical grocery getter, like Chris's Ford Raptor, which seemed quite suitable. Fighting the impulse to buy another car, Jack arrived at John's house, retrieved the key from under the flower pot, and let himself in. John was picking up Gaylis from the hospital, so Jack got busy in the kitchen. With more people expected, and limited kitchen space, he decided on a barbecue and hot pot theme for tonight. With the time constraint, the American-style steaks that required marinating a day ahead were out. Instead, Jack prepared a Northeast Chinese-style barbecue. He cut large chunks of beef hindquarters and lamb, skewering them in the traditional 3 lean 1 fat order. He brushed on a mixture of salt, pepper, soy sauce, sand ginger powder, minced garlic, and oyster sauce. Hot pot was even simpler. Ready-made soup bases were easy to prepare, and the most time-consuming part was just washing the ingredients. The party was set in John's backyard, by the pool. Jack decided to move the grill a bit to the side, recalling the unlucky guy who had bled to death there last time. The most time-consuming part was cleaning the pig brains, which Jack had bought for himself. Considering that no one else would likely touch them, he only bought 2 pairs, one to be wrapped in foil and grilled, the other for the hot pot. John entered, holding Gaylis close, and was startled, thinking a zombie crisis had erupted. Gaylis, however, seemed intrigued and asked Jack to ensure she got to try some. As the evening deepened, the rest of the crew started arriving from their shifts. Wesley brought 6 bottles of wine and a case of champagne, all personally selected by his mom from a French vineyard during her recent vacation. Tim showed up with a case of Budweiser, completing the evening's supply of alcohol. Jack had also prepared various fruit juices, plum powder, aloe, cactus, and watermelon, to help cool off from the barbecue and hot pot, ensuring the middle-aged folks wouldn't suffer from the heat again. John was busy lighting the barbecue, while the others set up tables, chairs, and dishes. Having had many such gatherings before, everyone was well practiced and knew their roles. Then the doorbell rang again. Bored from sculpting fruit platters, Jack went to answer the door and was greeted by the sight of Zoe and Maureen, both stunning in their similar office-style pencil skirts, one in white stockings, the other in black. Jack instinctively reached out to hug them, only to be stopped by their sharp looks. Realizing his mistake, he awkwardly scratched his head and moved to let them in. But then he heard a soft gasp behind him and noticed more people approaching. Jack froze at the sight of the next arrivals, Taylor escorting the petite Carla, which wasn't surprising since he had casually invited her that afternoon. But walking alongside them was Denise, the blonde woman from earlier. Oh boy, Jack thought. He had worried all day over his little mess, not realizing that John's situation was the real drama. He hoped the watermelons he bought would be enough for everyone. Taylor and Carla seemed unaware of the tension, exchanging puzzled looks at Jack's reaction. Taylor explained, I picked up Carla and ran into Denise at the corner. She said she wanted to thank John for saving her today, so I. Since this was John's house, Jack couldn't turn them away. He reluctantly invited them in, secretly eager to see John's reaction. "This woman is nuts," Tim declared after Jack recounted the day's events, bluntly sharing his opinion. "So, I've got a rival on Valentine's Day." Gaylis, remarkably composed, seemed entirely unbothered and joined the others in listening to Jack's story with amusement. Maureen, offering her professional insight, said, "Poor woman. She's probably trying to use John to escape her grief over losing her husband. She seems to have a somewhat obsessive personality and may lack close family support, leading her to seek emotional comfort. Like when I used to hang around the police station a lot. I only felt safe when I saw Jack and Hannah. But why is she interested in John and not Jack? They saved her together, right?" Carla, her innocent curiosity restored, raised her hand to ask. "Probably because John performed CPR on her. When she regained consciousness, he was the first person she saw. It's a bit like the suspension bridge effect. Am I right, Professor?" Jack played the dutiful student role. "Not bad. You're quite the quick learner," Maureen replied, giving him a playful, teasing look. "Professor Cahill, I think Denise needs psychological counseling. Do you have time soon?" John joined the circle, looking anxious as he glanced at Gaylis, then turned to Maureen for help. Chapter 105, Valentine's Mishap, Part 7. "No problem, she can make an appointment anytime." Maureen pulled out her business card from her bag and handed it to John. "I suggest you find a way to send her off. The atmosphere here is getting awkward, and Detective Gray should be here soon, right?" Jack suggested kindly. If this situation escalates, the rare gathering could be ruined, and any rumors could negatively affect John. Everyone agreed with Jack, and all eyes turned to John. "I'll handle it. Where is she?" John turned around, confused. The blonde woman who had been speaking to him in the backyard just moments ago had vanished. "I think I saw Denise sneak into your bedroom," Tyler pointed upstairs. His sharp observational skills as a journalist were spot on. John's expression changed dramatically, and he hurried to his bedroom, with Karis following closely. "Jack, call 911. A few minutes later, Karis' anxious voice echoed from the hallway, startling everyone. They all craned their necks to see what was happening. Soon, John and Karis were helping the blonde woman into the living room, laying her down on the floor. As Karis began to check her, an empty pill bottle rolled across the floor. "Paul, you promised to come home. You said you would come back. How can I go on without you?" Denise, in a daze, was muttering and caressing John's cheek. She swallowed a whole bottle of venlafaxine. "I need to induce vomiting." Karis signaled for everyone to help. "I'll do it." Jack put down his phone and grabbed a wash basin. He turned the blonde woman over and, using his left hand, pressed his middle finger against her stomach. "Can someone explain what just happened here?" Detective Gray asked, arriving with his wife and looking puzzled at the departing ambulance. John, looking dejected, recounted the events while stealing glances at Karis to gauge her reaction. Karis gently stroked John's cheek and reassured him, "This wasn't your fault. And I wouldn't mind if you made up for it with another romantic candlelight dinner." Jack, observing, noted how the older generation often showed their care differently. He glanced over at another couple. Angela was venting her frustration on Wesley, who seemed clueless about what he had done wrong. "Did Detective Calderon give you any trouble afterward?" Jack asked Angela while tending the grill. "You won't believe it, but before we left work, she privately apologized and invited me to participate in interrogating the bank teller." Angela accepted the lamb skewer Jack handed her, smiling broadly. "After the guy confessed, Detective Calderon promised to help expedite my formal entry into the detective unit." "Girls helping girls, huh? Looks like you've got a new bestie." Reflecting on John's earlier comments, the complex relationships among women were indeed puzzling. Meanwhile, at the other end of the gathering, 4 women, Zoe, Maureen, Tyler, and Kara, were chatting and laughing, despite their varied ages, jobs, and experiences. It was baffling how they connected so effortlessly. Jack enjoyed these simple get-togethers with friends. Everyone relaxed, enjoying food and wine, chatting happily without any scheming or conflicts. Gossip remained harmless and lighthearted. This genuine warmth of life deeply attracted a soul from another world, making him feel more integrated into this fascinating place. As the party wound down, Tyler had drunk a bit too much and had to take a cab home. Jack offered to drive young Kara. Over the past few months, Jack's feelings toward Kara had shifted from sympathy and pity to admiration. Despite her previous unfortunate experiences, she had quickly readjusted to a normal life. Compared to some Americans who would turn to alcohol or drugs at the slightest setback, she stood out as truly remarkable. Thanks to his advanced psychological skills, Jack could still notice small signs of discomfort when Kara interacted with men around John's or Detective Gray's age. But he was confident that with time, these memories would fade away completely. "Have you decided on a university yet?" Jack asked casually, knowing that she had good grades. "I've signed an early decision agreement with the University of Chicago Law School." Kara looked up, her eyes sparkling with pride and anticipation. "Wow, that's impressive. Planning to become a lawyer like Wesley?" Jack exaggerated his tone, knowing that the University of Chicago Law School ranked third in the nation. Kara scrunched her nose and made a face, seemingly annoyed by Jack's patronizing tone, but the gesture only made her look more endearing. "I want to become a police officer and work in crime prevention." "Kara, you're the strongest girl I've ever met," Jack said sincerely. "Do you want any gifts for your coming-of-age celebration?" Kara tilted her head, thinking, looking adorable, "Could you get me one of those self-defense guns like Ginny had?" Jack, slightly annoyed at the mention of an old incident, realized the women must have gossiped about it. "If your parents agree, I can get you a Beretta BU-9 Nano. You can even choose a color you like." The Beretta BU-9 Nano is a compact semi-automatic pistol, measuring 14.3 centimeters long and weighing less than 600 grams, about the size of an adult woman's hand. It's become a popular choice for self-defense among women in recent years. Considering that she was heading to Chicago, a city plagued by gun violence, a small handgun for protection seemed like a good idea. "When Hannah returns, you can ask her to teach you shooting and self-defense." After safely dropping Kara off and watching her enter her home, Jack felt relieved. Despite finding Kara's father a bit clueless, he recognized her mother as the real head of the household. Not every mother would be so open-minded as to let her daughter, who had been through such traumatic experiences, attend gatherings and encourage visits to the police station. Kara's mother was indeed a formidable woman. As Jack drove away, a call from Maureen saved him from his original plan of heading home to relax. Faced with a difficult choice, he had been hesitant to make a decision today. Under the complex gaze of the flower shop clerk, who envied and resented him simultaneously, Jack picked out 2 bouquets of roses, one red and one pink, and took out 2 sets of necklaces he had prepared earlier. He cheerfully headed to Maureen's house. Chapter 106, Let's Meow Together. As Jack took out his keys and unlocked the door, he found the living room completely dark. Holding the bouquet of flowers, he walked towards the bedroom, puzzled. Maureen had given him a key to her house long ago, making it easier for her favorite student to drop by any time for study sessions. He knocked lightly on the door, but there was no response, only the sound of meowing coming from inside. What's going on? Jack wondered. Maureen was allergic to cat hair. How could she have a cat now? Curious, Jack turned the doorknob and opened the bedroom door. To his surprise, he saw 2 cat girls, one dressed in black and the other in white. Both women wore matching fuzzy cat ear headbands and fluffy cat paw gloves. The difference was one wore black stockings and the other white. They were playfully meowing and tussling with each other, seemingly unlocking some extraordinary achievement. That night, Jack harshly criticized the 2 cat girls for their unprofessional cosplay. How could they be so scantily clad, wearing nothing but stockings? Essential elements like cat tails and collars were missing. For nearly 3 months following that evening, Jack experienced some of the most relaxed days since joining the police force. There were no serial killers or gang wars, no car chases or shootouts. Justin's recovery took longer than expected, nearly 50 days, but she exceeded everyone's expectations. Before Chris took her back to Chicago, she was already helping Jack in the kitchen. Though Justin still had some fear of going out and talking to strangers, she could communicate normally with familiar people. During a video call with Professor Hubble, she called him Daddy, bringing tears to the eyes of the 60-year-old professor. As a token of gratitude, Chris left Jack a handgun before departing, a Checkmate FK 7.5mm pistol, a rarity he had never seen in person due to its high price. This gun, costing up to $7,500, was said to have only 1,001 units sold in the entire USA. Its special 7.5mm bullets were priced at $83 per box of 50, 10 times the cost of regular bullets. But after firing just one magazine at the range, Jack fell in love with the heavy, 1.3 kilograms, all-metal handgun. Its sleek, elongated design was perfectly balanced, with a 15-round magazine that didn't feel bulky and fit his hand perfectly. Amazingly, despite its powerful 7.5mm bullets, which boasted a muzzle energy of over 1,200 joules and could still deliver 700 joules at 100 meters, the gun's recoil was incredibly smooth. Jack could easily fire it one-handed in rapid succession. The only downside was that its distinctive firing signature and unique caliber made it unsuitable for certain covert situations. Once Jack registered the gun, it would be easy to trace. However, this minor flaw was completely overshadowed by the gun's advantages. With it, Jack could handle most gunfights he might encounter in his daily routine. Even at 100 meters, it could easily penetrate a level IIIA bulletproof vest. With just a week left before Hannah returned from Quantico, Zoe was about to officially resign from the LAPD at the end of the month. Detective Gray would soon be promoted to Superintendent Gray, and Tim had passed the superintendent exam, becoming Superintendent Bradford and now the supervising officer for patrols. Angela had achieved her dream of becoming a detective and was now 4 months pregnant, busy planning her wedding, hoping to have everything ready before her due date. John was working towards becoming an instructor, possibly transitioning from the oldest rookie cop at the Wilshire Division to a novice trainer within a year. Last week, Jack submitted his resignation to the LAPD. Rossi had formally invited him to join the FBI, waiving the requirement for 2 years of work experience and the minimum age of 23, provided Jack could successfully complete the 5-month training program at Quantico. The most anxious person now was Lucy. Her relationship with Tim was about to go public, but Tim's recent promotion to interim supervisor meant he couldn't transfer to Metro as Jack remembered. This left Lucy with no other choice but to consider a transfer herself. Fortunately, no one was pushing Lucy to go undercover this time. Transferring to another division seemed to be her only option. Days were filled with routine tasks, issuing traffic tickets, dealing with street dealers, and petty theft. Jack's progress in the system had nearly stalled. Since the Rosalind case, he had accumulated a total of 2 system coins. Combined with one he had saved before, it still wasn't enough to upgrade a single skill to mastery. He even wondered if he would get a chance to use his new gun before becoming a federal agent. As of now, Jack was chasing a thief with Lucy. The young Asian man seemed to have some parkour skills, jumping and flipping like a mini Jackie Chan, while knocking over garbage bins and other obstacles in his path. Lucy, having partnered with Jack frequently and indulging in his midday meals, had put on a bit of weight and was struggling to keep up. Jack, not wanting to spend $160 on a new uniform before leaving the LAPD, carefully navigated through the alley, avoiding the scattered debris, and kept a measured distance from the thief to see how long he could keep running. After 10 minutes, the young man was gasping for breath. Realizing he couldn't shake Jack, he made a sharp turn, climbed over a dilapidated wire fence, and dashed into an abandoned factory. "Can you keep going?" Jack asked Lucy, who had just caught up, smiling. "Let's do this," Lucy replied, gritting her teeth. Jack, still smiling, drew his Glock and switched on the tactical flashlight. He planned to corner the thief, who had disappeared into the factory without making a sound. With his heightened sense perception over 25, Jack detected nothing, indicating the thief had likely found a hiding spot. The factory's open workshop was empty. Jack and Lucy crossed it quickly and entered the office area, clearing the rooms one by one along the corridor. Halfway through, the thief suddenly appeared in front of them, screaming, "My God, I touched it! Hands up!" Lucy commanded, her gun trained on him. "I'm going to be sick." The thief's cheeks puffed up as he spoke. Jack stepped aside discreetly and ordered, "Lie down, face down." Lucy moved forward to cuff him, asking, "What did you touch?" "A body, ugh." To prevent the guy from choking on his vomit, Jack grabbed his hair and turned his head to the side. He then told Lucy, "You watch him. I'll check it out." A body meant a case, and a case meant experience points. Jack was bored out of his mind these past few months, having spent most of his time upgrading his language skills to proficiency. Lately, he had even started learning Latin and Italian. As Jack ventured further into the factory, the thrill of discovering a new case filled him with excitement. Chapter 107: The Fortune of a Homeless Man. Jack stepped into the room from which the young Asian man had fled. The abandoned factory had no power supply, and even during the day, the interior was pitch dark. With the aid of the tactical flashlight attached to his Glock, he discovered the body of a middle-aged white male. Half an hour later, Angela, who was starting to show her pregnancy, and John arrived at the scene. "What's the situation?" Jack, having completed a preliminary examination of the body, removed his rubber gloves and shared his findings. White male, approximately 40 to 45 years old. The livor mortis is still spreading, so the estimated time of death is less than 12 hours. The exact time will have to be determined by the medical examiner. As for the cause of death, it's pretty clear: murder. Jack pointed to the corpse's neck. The cervical vertebrae are dislocated. Whoever did this was very professional and cold-blooded, instantaneous fatality. Jack's forensic skills had recently leveled up through self-study, making him competent enough to handle the responsibilities of a coroner in smaller jurisdictions. Angela frowned, knowing that such professional killing techniques typically indicated bigger trouble. The more skilled the perpetrator, the fewer clues they left behind, and the more complex the motives for the murder. "Have you surveyed the scene?" Lucy is canvassing the area. This place has been abandoned for a long time, with no cameras and few visitors, not even many homeless people. Jack gestured outside. "Speaking of the homeless, I found something odd." He pulled out an evidence bag. "The body had no ID or driver's license, but I found this." Angela took the evidence bag and glanced inside, puzzled. A meal voucher for a soup kitchen. Was this guy homeless? But his clothes are brand new. Jack nodded. Exactly, brand new, from head to toe. A recently wealthy homeless person. Could that be why he was targeted? Angela considered this for a moment and then asked, "Did you check his hobo wallet?" Jack was taken aback. "What's that?" "Sometimes, homeless people stash their valuables inside their shoes. We call it a hobo wallet." Angela's expression suggested she was amused to have stumped Jack. Since joining the precinct, Jack's relentless pursuit of knowledge had put considerable pressure on the veteran officers. Skills and insights they had accumulated over years, even decades, Jack had almost fully absorbed in less than a year. Putting his gloves back on, Jack removed the dead man's shoes and found something inside the left one. A key card. "Where's it from?" Angela peered over his shoulder. "An SRO, single-room occupancy hotel, in the downtown area." Jack placed the key card into another evidence bag. "Got time to check it out?" "I've heard there's a Michelin-starred dessert place nearby," Angela suggested. Jack, of course, couldn't refuse the opportunity to join a detective on a case. It meant valuable experience points. As they walked to the entrance of the abandoned factory, they saw John and Lucy talking to a man in a work uniform. Behind him was a van with a security company logo matching the one on his uniform. Jack opened the patrol car's trunk, took out their prepared lunches, and handed the evidence bags and the food to Lucy. "What are you guys discussing?" John shrugged. "The only camera is broken, so no surveillance footage." The worker spoke with a distinct rhythm characteristic of his race. "It's been busted for a week, otherwise they wouldn't have called me to fix it." Lucy looked puzzled at the lunchbox in her hand. "Isn't it too early for lunch?" "It's only 10 o'clock. "No, this is for you and John. The forensics team won't be here for another couple of hours. You and John need to stay at the scene. Angela and I are heading to the SRO downtown to investigate. She said there's a great dessert place nearby, and I've heard their Italian food is fantastic. You know me, once I taste something, I can replicate it." Both John and Lucy showed mixed feelings, envious that Jack got to go with Angela while also looking forward to tasting his recreation of that supposedly amazing Italian food later. Jack's culinary skills were well recognized. The most incredible part was his ability to recreate any dish he had tasted with remarkable accuracy. Whether it was a grandmother's secret recipe or a special homemade sauce, Jack could replicate them all. Fortunately, Jack's lunchboxes always contained a variety of delicious options. Lucy peeked inside and, smiling, placed it in the trunk of the patrol car John had arrived in. This place calls itself a hotel-style apartment. Jack was incredulous as he entered the downtown SRO. The elevator was rusted, and the hallway decor was dated to at least the mid-20th century. The walls were peeling, the stairwell was littered with needles and suspicious stains, and the overhead fluorescent lights flickered ominously. If it were nighttime, Jack doubted he'd have the courage to walk in alone. The place seemed perfect for a haunted house setup. Even the dingy apartment his parents had left him in the lower town had a better environment than this. The surprising part was this was downtown, not some crime-ridden, dilapidated slum where properties were virtually worthless. The rent here is only $800 a month. Many families of 3 are willing to pay a bit extra to bribe the manager and squeeze into these less than 10 square meter rooms. Angela rolled her eyes. Jack, thinking of those who lived in underground garages in Beijing, understood. LA, after all, was the second largest city in North America. This wasn't unexpected. Angela waved the key card she had just obtained from the hotel manager. The manager said the victim checked in 3 days ago under the name Joe Delacruz. He prepaid for a week, all in cash. As she swiped the card and opened the door, they found a barebones room with almost no furniture. By the window were 2 single beds and a nightstand, while the floor was scattered with clothing and shoe packaging. On one of the beds lay 2 pizza boxes. Jack shut the door behind him, briefly peeked into the bathroom, and then closed it again, deciding to avoid a closer look before lunch. It looks like Joe bought quite a few things. Angela crouched to inspect the packaging on the floor. New clothes, new shoes, wait, 2 different shoe sizes. That might be a clue. Jack pointed to the bathroom. There are 2 sets of toothbrushes on the sink. Seems like Joe had company the hotel manager didn't mention. In places like this, they don't care. As long as they get paid, they stay silent. Angela flipped the mattress and found 2 rolls of cash underneath. This looks like at least $5,000 or $6,000. Jack picked up a roll and was surprised to see they were all $100 bills, which were rare in daily transactions. Most people use 20s, with 50s being uncommon. Just then, the door beeped and opened. A pale, short, and frail-looking white man stepped inside. He froze upon seeing Jack in his patrol uniform and Angela in plain clothes but with a badge on her belt. Chapter 108, The Disabled Veteran. Sorry, wrong room. The short man swung the door shut and bolted down the corridor. Stop, hey. Don't run. Jack sprang into action, chasing after the man and pinning him against the elevator door just as he reached it. Angela, moving slowly and carefully with a hand on her back, gave Jack an encouraging nod as she approached. Hands behind your back, fingers interlaced. Jack methodically patted the man down, who had seemingly resigned himself to the situation and made no effort to resist. Found a knife, huh? Jack pulled a military knife from the man's waist and handed it to Angela. Noticing something odd about the man's right leg, Jack pulled up his pants leg to reveal a prosthetic limb. Rolling up the man's sleeve, Jack saw a tattoo depicting the earth, a bald eagle, and an anchor. Marine Corps. You're a veteran. Did you lose your leg in combat? Yes, officer. An IED took it off, the short man responded obediently. Jack lightened his grip a bit, recognizing the man's cooperation and his status as a disabled veteran. Jack's hopes for a pleasant lunch were dashed, and Angela only had time to grab a dessert from across the street before they had to take the suspect back to the station. What am I being charged with? The disabled Marine tried to glean some information as he was taken out of the car. Initially, you're under arrest. The rest is up to the DA, Angela replied, trailing behind and savoring her cherry cheesecake. As a pregnant woman, she had the ultimate excuse for a constant supply of snacks. So, why were the police in my hotel room? The Marine still had questions, but he ran straight into Tim, who was walking out. Mickey. Tim looked at him in surprise. Sergeant. The disabled Marine, Mickey, recognized Tim as well. You know him. Angela's eyes widened in surprise, and Jack was also curious, not having pegged Tim as a former sergeant. I was his squad leader in Afghanistan. Tim's gaze was complex, and Jack noticed that Mickey's face showed a mix of shame, resentment, and a hint of anger. Clearly, there was a story here. What happened? Tim watched as Jack took Mickey for fingerprinting, clearly puzzled. You have a fiancé in San Diego, and the Disabled Veterans Association found you a job. Mickey avoided Tim's searching eyes, his gaze falling, his face more numb than pained. What can I say? I've come to terms with it. Jack led Mickey into a holding cell, but the disabled veteran was still persistent in his questioning. I have the right to know why I'm being arrested, don't I? He can't tell you, Tim answered for Jack. Can you? Mickey pointed to the badge on Tim's uniform. Tim shook his head, his tone softening. I can't either. It involves the victim's privacy. The victim. Mickey immediately became tense. Is it Joe? What happened to him? Is he okay? Tim shook his head. I've already said too much. Tears welled up in Mickey's eyes, his voice choked. Is he dead? Please. Tim sighed and didn't answer directly. A detective will be in soon to question you, he said as he turned and walked away. It looks like your relationship with him is complicated. Care to talk about it? Jack, having no recollection of this scenario, was curious about the nature of their connection. I had something to do with his leg, Tim began, reminiscing. Back then, he got in trouble and was confined. I broke protocol to let him out early, and he ended up getting blown up that day while on patrol. But you did it out of kindness, Jack countered, not understanding Tim's logic. Why feel guilty about that? Rules are important. I shouldn't have broken them. Jack found this response to be typical Tim. Jack never quite grasped the American obsession with destiny and Tim's peculiar sense of guilt. Angela will start the interrogation in about 20 minutes. I need to organize the paperwork. See you then. Split line. You can't really believe I killed him, right? Mickey protested, visibly upset. We don't know anything, which is why we're asking you, Angela responded calmly, her mood steady after a sugar boost. Let me put it this way. Joe died from a broken neck. His cervical spine was acutely compressed, a job done by a professional. Jack watched Mickey closely as he explained. It wasn't me. Mickey's expression was sorrowful, tears welling up again. Jack thought it unlikely for a seasoned soldier to fake such emotions convincingly. What about the money under the mattress? Where did that come from? Jack pressed further. Mickey sniffed, his voice now tinged with a hint of guilt. A few days ago, Joe came to me, saying he snuck into a building and found a huge stash of cash, hundreds of millions just piled up on the shelves. Hundreds of millions in cash. Are you sure? Angela sat up straight, her eyes gleaming with interest. Mickey nodded. Yes, and there were machines and armed guards with automatic weapons. Then he stole a part of it. Why did he spend it with you? Angela questioned skeptically. We were close. He was a fellow veteran, and we always had each other's backs on the streets. Mickey grew agitated, prompting Jack to test him further. And then you decided to kill him and keep the rest of the money for yourself? Mickey snorted. He only took a grand total of $10,000. We spent half of it that day. I told him not to go back, that he got lucky the first time. Mickey looked guilty. I should have gone with him, because if it were me, he would have gone with me. We always looked out for each other. He began to sob. Jack was pretty convinced Mickey wasn't the killer. A story about millions of dollars in cash seemed too far-fetched to be made up by an average person. Just then, John entered the room and beckoned to Jack and Angela. Jack and Angela followed John out, and Tim, who had been listening to the interrogation through the one-way glass in the adjacent room, joined them. The money found in the hotel room was all counterfeit, John said gravely. Jack's eyes lit up. Real cash could mean trouble, possibly leading to a DEA investigation or worse, but counterfeit money. That was a jackpot. They could take down the whole operation, and by the time the Secret Service showed up to claim credit, the case might already be wrapped up, earning them a ton of experience. Chapter 109, The Counterfeit Bills. Are you sure? Angela's excitement mirrored Jack's. Uncovering a massive counterfeiting operation through a murder case felt like hitting the jackpot. It's the most realistic counterfeit I've ever seen, but it's definitely fake, John affirmed. Back when I worked as a construction contractor, I often handled cash, especially large denominations. John was confident. These bills are crafted incredibly well, but under UV light, the fluorescent security thread has the wrong color. On the 1996 series $100 bill, it should be red, not blue. Jack pondered for a moment before reopening the interrogation room door. He peered in at Mickey. The machines Joe saw, were they printers? Yes, Mickey nodded. Tell us where the money was found. Split line. This isn't quite the counterfeit bust you painted for us, Hondo, the fully armed SWAT team leader, quipped at Tim. They were at 214 Mill Street, standing in an empty warehouse with no signs of the alleged counterfeit bills or sophisticated printing machines Mickey had described. Nyla, who had also been called to assist, scanned the area with her tactical flashlight, questioning Tim's intel. Are you sure your military buddy was telling the truth? Yes, I trust him, Tim replied resolutely. Jack ran his fingers over the corner of a shelf and then rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, feeling the residue. There were definitely a lot of paper products on these shelves. This isn't just dust, it's fine paper residue. I can't say for certain if it's acid-free, but forensics can easily verify that. Tim nodded at Jack. They must have moved everything after they killed Joe. Hondo, holding his rifle, looked around. Their cleanup must have been meticulous. There's no visible trace that this place was used for printing counterfeit money. Maybe not. John crouched near the door and picked up a small piece of paper. What did you find? The group gathered around. John showed the paper fragment to Lucy and Jack. Does this logo look familiar? Jack immediately recognized the blue emblem. That's from the uniform of the guy fixing the camera during our morning search. It was also on the van parked outside. Yes, right across from where Joe was killed, John said excitedly. He mentioned that the camera had been broken for a week. Did you ask him his name? Nyla pressed. No, I assumed the camera lead was a dead end, John admitted, frustration evident. Actually, my body camera might have caught him, Lucy interjected, excitedly pulling out her phone. She connected it to her body camera and found footage showing the repairman and the van with the blue logo. He wasn't really fixing the camera, he was stalling us. This guy is definitely connected to the case. Tim nodded. We should run a facial recognition scan on him, see if we can get any leads. Before Tim could say more, his radio crackled to life with Captain Gray's urgent voice. Bradford, you and your team need to leave the building and return to the station immediately. Tim thought he misheard. Captain. Pack up and head back now. That's an order. Everyone exchanged puzzled looks. What's going on? We just got a call from the chief of police. Your search has triggered high-level federal interest, Gray explained as the team regrouped. Night had fallen by the time they returned to the Wilshire police station briefing room, where Zoe and Captain Gray were waiting. But this is a murder investigation. Are we just supposed to walk away? John was bewildered. Zoe shook her head. No, but we can't continue through the counterfeit angle. The team looked at each other in confusion. Tim seemed to have an inkling but was clearly frustrated. But our only lead is tied to the counterfeit money. The evidence shows this is one case. What's the situation, Chief? Nyla asked. Zoe shrugged. The chief wouldn't disclose the source of the orders, only that it's from a very high level and non-negotiable. Captain Gray sighed, looking equally frustrated. Call it a night. We'll regroup in the morning. That's all for now. This isn't right, Angela grumbled, her usual soothing yogurt balls failing to lift her spirits. She had stayed at the station for safety while Nyla took her place in the field. Now, with the case stalling, her frustration was palpable. Of course it's not right, but it's an order, Captain Gray reiterated before leaving the room with Zoe. So, we're just going to let this go. Jack was visibly annoyed, feeling the opportunity for substantial progress slipping away. If we want to be smart, yes, Nyla said, grabbing a yogurt ball from Angela's bag. Lucy raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like a flat-out no. Angela glared at Tim. What do you think? Tim crossed his arms, carefully considering the situation. This case clearly conflicts with a federal operation, but we lack enough information to proceed. Should I reach out to the FBI? Jack held up his phone, suggesting contacting David Rossi, who had the necessary clearance, though he was less sure about involving Hannah, who was still an intern. It won't help, Tim interrupted. If the FBI were handling the counterfeit operation, they would have openly taken over the case and had LAPD running in circles. So, Jack drew out the word, waiting for Tim to elaborate. To figure out which federal agency is involved, we need to make some noise, show that we're not giving up. They'll come to us, Tim explained. How do we get their attention? Lucy asked, tilting her head in curiosity. I'll submit a facial recognition request to the federal database under the captain's authority, using the image of the camera repair guy, Tim mused. And then what? Lucy pressed. Then we play it by ear. They've blocked us from following the counterfeit trail, but they can't stop us from pursuing the murder investigation, Jack concluded, easing the team's doubts. The man fixing the camera at the murder scene was either part of the counterfeit ring or a federal agent investigating the case. Either way, they could classify him as a suspect in the homicide. Chapter 110, Colonel Norman Jenkins. After finishing his report on the computer, Jack stretched and prepared to head home. Just then, Tim hurried by, motioning for Jack to follow him. They walked into a small break room where John and the others were already waiting. Tim closed the door and got straight to the point. We've got a problem. The facial recognition request we submitted triggered LA's law enforcement conflict prevention system. The source is pointing to the CIA. John's eyes widened in disbelief. Why would the CIA be involved in a counterfeit money case? This is more serious than we thought. If the CIA is involved, it's a matter of national security. Are we sure we want to keep digging? Nyla warned, looking around the room with a serious expression. Tim, however, seemed determined not to give up. I promised Mickey I'd find Joe's killer. Joe was a soldier who served his country. He deserves justice, not to die in obscurity. Then let's proceed carefully. Who do you think the CIA will target first if they realize pressuring us from above isn't working? Jack had barely finished speaking when everyone's gaze fell on John. Why me? John felt somewhat insulted, wondering why they thought he was the easiest target in the room. Lucy began counting off on her fingers. Jack has already submitted his resignation and is about to join the FBI. Tim just got promoted to captain, making him the highest ranking among us. Angela is a detective, and Nyla voluntarily transferred from the DEA and was awarded a medal by the governor. What about you then? John asked, puzzled. Guess where Lucy's been sleeping lately? Angela shrugged, tossing the question out as she left the room with a smirk, leaving Lucy and Tim slightly embarrassed, while John had an epiphany. Split line. Before 11 p.m. that night, there was a knock at John's door. When John opened it, he was startled to see the same black man who had posed as a security company repairman earlier that day. Hey, man, we need to talk. His accent had dropped the casual rap tone from before. Aren't you going to invite me in? The man smiled warmly, noticing John's hesitation. Why don't you start by telling me who you are? John asked, eyes filled with suspicion. Right now, you should consider me your friend. And you should be glad, because you don't want to be my enemy. Despite his smile, there was a clear undertone of menace in his voice. Now, let me in. The man spoke with a calm but commanding tone. John didn't say a word and stepped aside to let him in. You've done a nice job redecorating. Did the soon-to-be FBI agent help you out? The man acted like a casual visitor, looking around John's home. John remained defiant, not buying into the friendly facade. I know your game. You walk in, look around, drop hints of personal information to make it seem like you're in control. So, tell me, who are you really? You can call me Colonel Norman Jenkins. But you're with the CIA, aren't you? John directly confronted him. Names don't mean much. My team operates in the shadows, doing the work no one will acknowledge, Colonel Norman Jenkins explained. Why are you here? John asked, though he already had an idea. Colonel Jenkins's demeanor shifted as he took a step closer, staring directly into John's eyes. Consider this a warning. Tell your police buddies to stop meddling in this. Trying to dig up my information was a grave mistake. You won't find anything. Let's hope this is the last time you act foolishly. John frowned, refusing to back down from the threat. We just want to know who killed Joe Delacruz. Who? Colonel Jenkins seemed momentarily confused, then remembered. You mean that homeless vet? Why do you care? John was taken aback by the question. Why? He was a person, a veteran. He served his country. Hold on a second. You've got this all wrong. Colonel Jenkins's tone was puzzled, as if he was genuinely perplexed by John's stance. We're on the same side here. You, me, and Joe, we're all Americans. We're all making sacrifices for this country's interests. My team's operations are just on a more global scale. John interrupted his grand speech. So you think that justifies killing people? Colonel Jenkins let out a scoff, looking at John as if he were naive. Every war has casualties. Joe was just collateral damage. You should hope you're not next. He patted John on the shoulder and left the house without further explanation. John stood for a moment, listening to the car engine fade away before calling out, "He's gone, guys." From the attic, backyard, and even the bedroom, the rest of the team emerged. Jack entered through the front door, dressed in black. As everyone turned to him, he asked, "Did you get the tracker on?" "Yep, it's under his car." "We'll know wherever he goes," Jack said, waving a tablet with the tracker's signal on display. Putting a tracker on a CIA agent's car, now that's thrilling. What's our next move? Follow him. Lucy was eager and ready for action. No, the next steps are for just two people, Tim said, looking at Nyla with a tone that brooked no argument. From here on, Nyla and I will handle it. The rest of you can't afford to get involved. Jack raised a finger, indicating he had something to add. How about you hear me out before we make any decisions? Everyone turned their attention to him. Ahem. Jack cleared his throat. First, we now know Joe's death is connected to Norman Jenkins and his team, right? I heard him say, "collateral damage," in my earpiece. Everyone nodded in agreement. Second, our visitor never officially identified himself, right? So, we could say a suspect in the murder investigation threatened an LAPD officer, couldn't we? The group paused, considering the idea. While it seemed a bit of a stretch, they realized it was technically valid. So, following him makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And if we discover something during our surveillance, like a stash of counterfeit money, we wouldn't be violating any of the federal directives placed on us, would we? Chapter 111, Like Mud, Clark. Tim seemed to have grasped something. So you're saying, if we make a big show, they'll be afraid to act rashly? No, Jack shook his head. We can only put on the appearance of making a big show, but we can't really do it. If their covert operation fails, we won't get what we want either, so we have to be strategic. An hour later, at the LA Long Beach cargo terminal. Why did you install such a conspicuous row of red breathing lights on the front of this Firebird? It looks cool, but it's terrible for night operations. Tim complained, but the envy and jealousy in his eyes for Jack's car were unmistakable. This is a toy to attract girls, not for covert missions. You better hope nothing goes wrong tonight, or if my baby gets even a scratch, you're responsible. Jack's words were harsh, but he was also regretting his decision. His flashy car wasn't equipped with artificial intelligence or even bulletproof capabilities. He had driven it in a moment of impulse, though it did feel great on the way. Jack, Tim, everyone's in position, Angela's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie. The two in the car exchanged a look, opened the doors, and got out. Jack gave a low warning, "Be careful and stick to the plan." Tim nodded, saying nothing more, pulled out his gun, and crouched down, moving stealthily towards the docks. Jack took a different route and soon climbed to the top of two stacked containers. The docks were brightly lit. About a dozen armed men were busy, some operating forklifts to load cargo into an open container, while others stood guard with automatic weapons. Jack noticed a black man, who had introduced himself as Colonel Norman Jenkins, standing by an SUV, discussing something with another person. A few minutes later, there was a clanging sound from a corner. Colonel Norman Jenkins looked up and waved his hand, causing everyone to scatter. Soon, John, Neela, and Tim were brought out, hands on their heads. "John, what's going on?" "I warned you," Colonel Norman Jenkins said, spreading his hands as he approached John. "But I didn't listen," John replied calmly. "I'm disappointed." I thought you were smart. Colonel Norman Jenkins's smile masked a hint of hidden menace. No, the smart one is my friend. Otherwise, the FBI wouldn't have noticed him. This was all part of his plan. John tilted his head, and everyone followed his gaze to see Jack standing next to the stopped forklift, holding a gun to a hostage's head. With his other hand, he pulled back the tarp covering the cargo on the forklift's pallet, revealing neatly stacked bundles of $100 bills. How much is on this pallet? Let me guess, 20 million. It's the first time I've seen someone use a container to transport cash. How much can you fit in a full container? 1 billion. 2 billion. Jack taunted with a grin, seemingly unfazed by the multiple guns aimed at him. Colonel Norman Jenkins's smile remained. See, John, you don't really think you can threaten us with one hostage, do you? I told you, sometimes we have to accept collateral damage. John remained expressionless, pointing to his chest, where a laser red dot was clearly visible. Neela lowered her hands from her head and crossed them over her chest, rolling her eyes. And what if that collateral damage includes you? .50 caliber, from 350 meters away, fired by Angela Lopez, the LAPD's best sharpshooter. You must have done your homework on us, right? As she spoke, she waved toward the highest crane on the dock. Colonel Norman Jenkins's smile stiffened and then turned grim. Why make it difficult? This isn't going to end well for anyone. We're trained to complete our mission at any cost. Are you sure you can complete it? Jack snapped his fingers stylishly. In the distance, a police car with flashing lights drove up, though it didn't use its siren. Lucy and Zoe stepped out of the car and walked toward them. Can someone explain who gave you the authority to print counterfeit money in my jurisdiction and kill civilians without consequence? Zoe demanded righteously. Colonel Norman Jenkins was already feeling overwhelmed. A district police chief about to transition into politics seemed like the last straw. All right, Norman, maybe we should hear what they want, said the person who had been talking with Norman by the SUV earlier, stepping out of its shadow. Jack's eyes widened in shock, pupils dilating. Like mud, Clark. This stern-faced man with a touch of melancholy in his eyes was none other than John Reese, the cold, suit-clad operative, and future ally of Harold Finch. His sudden appearance caught Jack completely off guard. Fortunately, everyone's attention was on Reese, and no one noticed Jack's momentary lapse. Someone among you killed Joe Dracus. Hand him over, and we'll leave, Tim demanded, looking at Reese and then turning to Norman. And the money? Norman nodded toward the container and the pallet on the forklift. That's not our concern. Tim glanced at the container filled with counterfeit bills, a hint of disgust flashing in his eyes. Tim. John sounded like he couldn't believe what he heard. John, it's their mission, not ours. Listen to Tim, Jack quickly intervened to prevent John from acting rashly. The atmosphere grew tense, and Colonel Norman Jenkins's eyes darted around nervously. Everyone seemed to be waiting for his decision. John Reese walked up to him. You DIA guys are in charge here, but this operation is under the CIA's name. Fine, Colonel Norman Jenkins finally relented. Pettigrew. Surrender your weapon. What? A surprised colleague turned to look at him. We've been through so much together, and you're just going to sell me out like this. Colonel Norman Jenkins was equally frustrated. I warned you to keep a low profile. Look at the mess you've made. What can I do now? Start a shootout with the LAPD here. He paused and then spoke in a low voice. They have no direct evidence, so keep your mouth shut and let the lawyers handle it. You'll be out soon enough. Pettigrew pursed his lips, and after a long moment, reluctantly said, Yes, sir. Chapter 112, A Resolution Without Conclusion and Hannah's Return. Colonel Norman Jenkins's smile returned as he addressed Tim. Are we good now, Inspector Bradford? Tim waited until Lucy and John had finished handcuffing Pettigrew before signaling OK towards the crane and speaking into the walkie-talkie. It's all clear, Angela. The red dot on Colonel Norman Jenkins's chest flickered out. He turned to his team, making a gesture to hurry things up. All right, let's wrap this up. What will happen to the money? John asked loudly. It will fund our covert operations for the next 5 years, Colonel Norman Jenkins said with a broad smile, not looking at all like someone who had been under duress just moments ago. The federal government spends billions annually on secret missions. Bradford probably knows a bit about it. He must have seen plenty of script in Afghanistan, Norman continued. Tim lowered his head, seemingly recalling some unpleasant memories, and reluctantly admitted, yes. Nearby, Jack had already holstered his gun and even helped the forklift driver, who had been his hostage, cover the stack of counterfeit bills with the tarp again. Hearing the conversation, he snorted internally. Military script or not, calling them replacement notes was just euphemistic nonsense. The conversation continued, and John was still puzzled. But these are counterfeit bills. Colonel Norman Jenkins's face took on a peculiar glow as he spoke with an almost operatic tone. You could think of it this way, we're not printing money, we're printing freedom. Jack nearly gagged but remembered his own car guzzling cheap gas. Compared to his previous life, where a tank of gas could cost as much as a dinner out, he figured he needed to change his mindset. Now he was living in the land of the free, where freedom and oil were cherished, both as cheap as possible. As the LAPD prepared to leave, the CIA and DIA agents continued their work. Jack was about to slip away when John Reese stopped him. Ever considered joining the CIA? This blunt recruitment approach was very much in Reese's style. Jack grinned. I prefer catching bad guys and solving cases. The life of a 007 isn't really my thing. Jack wasn't sure if this Reese was the same as the one from Person of Interest, who would later be betrayed by the CIA. But compared to the CIA, the FBI seemed safer, and the CIA wasn't exactly in the policing business. As he walked away briskly, he found his LAPD colleagues gathered around Zoe. She was warning them, I wasn't here tonight, and none of you saw me, got it? Everyone nodded in unison. Bringing Zoe in had been Jack's idea. During the planning, Jack had insisted on having as many people as possible tonight and someone with enough authority to keep things under control, but not to escalate unless absolutely necessary. The larger the operation, the more these agents, who acted recklessly abroad, would be deterred. Killing one or two officers might be something the higher-ups would cover up, but wiping out the main force of the LA division and escaping unscathed was a fantasy. Patrol officers, despite their lower ranks, were state employees. Jack's plan was intricate. Tim and the others would distract, Jack would confirm the counterfeit money's presence, crucial evidence. If things got out of hand, the uninformed Long Beach police would find the counterfeit bills, and the so-called federal covert mission would be exposed. It was like a high-wire act. Angela with her sniper rifle was the safety net, and Zoe was the balancing pole. She had only said one line, but it legitimized the entire event. The CIA and DIA agents genuinely believed these LAPD officers were determined to seek justice for a murdered homeless man. Finally, it was over. Zoe drove home alone, pretending to ignore what had happened. The others took the suspect back to the precinct. You just happened to be wandering around the docks, and the murderer of Joe Dracus conveniently appeared in front of you and surrendered. Sergeant Gray, now in civilian clothes and ready to go off duty, looked at them with a skeptical expression. Yes, sir. The group, who had rehearsed their story on the way back, responded in unison. And if the chief calls to chew me out tomorrow morning? He won't. Tim interrupted firmly before Gray could finish his sentence. The two men exchanged a glance, and Sergeant Gray seemed exasperated. Fine, I don't want to know what really happened tonight. I'm going home to sleep. Just make sure your reports don't have any inconsistencies. Yes, sir. They responded again in unison, laughing as they dispersed. An hour later, in the bustling hall of LAX, Hannah, dressed in a sleek black business suit, looked every bit the part of a successful professional woman. She walked out of the terminal pulling her suitcase and removed her sunglasses to scan the area, but she didn't see the familiar tall figure she was hoping for, which left her a bit disappointed. Just as she reached into her bag to pull out her phone, a strong hand suddenly grabbed her arm from behind. Hannah was about to retaliate with a swift kick when she heard a voice she had longed to hear. LAPD, you're under arrest, Missy. Ah. Hannah screamed and spun around, throwing herself into the arms of the person behind her. Don't I get a kiss? Jack's sentence was cut off as she kissed him fiercely. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Ouch, is this a new move you learned at Quantico? Jack wiped his lips, which had nearly been sucked dry, and reached for Hannah's suitcase. Hannah just giggled stupidly and finally managed to say, I missed you. The simplest words often carry the deepest emotions. Seeing her looking at him with nothing but love, having lost all her high-powered aura from when she got off the plane, Jack felt a pang in his chest, as if this moment touched something deep within him. He instinctively pulled Hannah back into his arms and whispered, "I missed you too, every day." Noticing something different about the feel of her against his chest, Jack frowned and stepped back to take a closer look at her. "You've lost weight. Your legs, your waist. 15 pounds. The food there was awful. Those nutritionists kept giving us mush every day. I dream about your sweet and sour pork and tangy ribs," Hannah pouted in her southern drawl, both whining and sounding irresistibly cute. Chapter 113, Chris's Trouble. "Wow, did you hit the jackpot?" Hannah exclaimed as she slid into the driver's seat of Jack's new toy in the parking lot. She couldn't resist checking out the feel of the Firebird's controls. As a veteran muscle car enthusiast, she revved the engine lightly and could tell immediately that this Firebird had more power than her own Shelby GT500. "A friend hooked me up with a gig for the IRS. Got a nice bonus out of it. This car alone cost me a third of that," Jack admitted, feeling a bit guilty about the impulsive purchase. But the dream of owning such a car was something he never thought he could afford in his previous life. Totally worth it. The ladies will go crazy for this car. How did you come up with the idea to add that red light strip on the front? It's so cool. Hannah's satisfied smile as she patted the steering wheel gave Jack the impression of a wife showing approval for a new household purchase, blending into a surreal image of an elder teaching a younger family member. Back at Hannah's place, Jack was about to carry her suitcase inside when he noticed her standing at her front door, lost in thought. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, puzzled. He had spent a good part of the day cleaning up the house in anticipation of her return. Not only had he trimmed the lawn meticulously, but he also cleaned the backyard pool and filled it with fresh water. Of course, there was a bit of a personal motive behind sprucing up the pool. Though his oversized bathtub was fantastic, seeing her in a swimsuit had its own appeal. Reflecting on their time together, he realized he hadn't seen either Zoe or Maureen in swimsuits either. "No one's ever been this good to me before." Hannah threw her arms around Jack, her voice thick with emotion. She was already tearing up and clung to him tightly, her legs wrapping around his waist. "Ahem, there are people inside," Jack awkwardly patted her waist, whispering a reminder in her ear. Surprise. Before Hannah could process what was happening, a group of people jumped out from all corners, LAPD colleagues, the two formidable ladies Kara and Maureen, the Hunter couple, Zoe's parents, the Andersons, and even her frenemy Taylor. Fortunately, being the outgoing Texan she was, Hannah was far from embarrassed. She slid off Jack, kissed him on the cheek, and then joined the group with joyous laughter. Jack had his hands full today. To showcase his cooking skills, he had spent the last few days sampling LA's renowned Italian restaurants. Italian cuisine, often dubbed the mother of Western food, is arguably the most palatable for people from his original homeland, Celis. It's also widely loved by Americans. This gathering was the largest he had ever hosted, and Jack had spent 2 days preparing all the ingredients: Milanese veal shank, ham and cheese steak, stewed white bean tripe, vegetable roasted quail, tomato braised sea bass, seafood alfredo, margarita pizza, tiramisu, and even an ice cream cake. Mrs. Anderson's gaze toward Jack had softened to the point of seeing him as a son-in-law. She had always treated Hannah like her own daughter, so this development was hardly surprising to Jack. Mr. Anderson, however, had a more scrutinizing look. He had long suspected something. For years, his little girl had spent every evening after work hanging out with a young cop barely out of his teens, hardly home even on weekends. Now, with his adopted daughter, Hannah, appearing to be deeply in love with this young man, had he not known Jack's marksmanship and the number of criminals he had taken down since becoming a cop, he might have already confronted Jack with a shotgun. Fortunately, Zoe had given the family some leeway by labeling Jack a psychologist. Coming from an old political family, Mr. Anderson had seen his share of shady dealings and had his own youthful indiscretions. What mattered most was his daughter's happiness. Still, Mr. Anderson remained puzzled. Why did the psychologists look at his daughter seem a bit off? As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Hannah cheerfully saw everyone out and then scampered into the kitchen to pester Jack, who was still busy. "Stop it." Feeling the familiar weight of Hannah clinging to his back and her breath tickling his ear, Jack turned and playfully smeared foam on her pert nose. Training was exhausting. My skin's getting rough, and I even got a scrape on my leg. Will it leave a scar? Hannah's coquettish tone was laced with a flimsy little lie. Jack felt a mix of emotions. 5 months wasn't that long or short. In today's world, even Americans, accustomed to fleeting relationships, and his fellow Calicians, found long-distance relationships challenging. Hannah's consistent, daily video calls and her clingy demeanor since her return spoke volumes. Jack sighed inwardly. How did he stay single into his 40s in Sealis, yet fall so quickly here? Was his wonderful single life really slipping away? Just as he was about to lift Hannah, ready to savor this ripe cherry that had practically fallen into his lap, his phone rang. Jack, Justin and I are in trouble. Can you come to Chicago right away? I need your help to protect a girl, said Chris, the accountant. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Chris was his financial lifeline for the next year. Nothing could happen to him. No problem. Have Justin send me the details. Jack agreed immediately. As soon as he hung up, a notification from the special chat app Justin had installed on his phone popped up. Seeing Jack's expression turn serious, Hannah sensed it was important and reluctantly unwound her legs from his waist. As Jack scanned through the messages, his face grew puzzled, and Hannah, curious, poked his cheek with a finger. What's up? Can I know? Hannah's unexpected understanding surprised Jack. Given their relationship, he figured it was time she learned a bit more. Jack briefly explained Chris and Justin's background, especially their dealings in the gray areas of the law and their intricate ties with the IRS supervisor, Simon. He wasn't sure how Hannah would take this. Though she had agreed to help him seek personal revenge before, she was now newly integrated into the FBI. What if her perspective had shifted? Is he the accountant who got you the IRS job? Hannah's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Yes. My mortgage plan relies on the trade company he's setting up. If something happens to him, I might end up needing you to support me. Hannah's eyes darted around thoughtfully, her expression comically conflicted, making Jack laugh. As much as relying on someone else had its advantages, the idea clashed with his intrinsic Calician pride. Chapter 114, The Accountant's Story. Chris had Asperger's syndrome from a young age. You could simply understand it as a severe form of autism. His mother couldn't bear the psychological strain and left, abandoning him and his brother. Their father was an old-school military man who believed the world was inherently harsh, and Chris needed to learn to adapt. He subjected Chris to bright lights, loud noises, and rigorous combat training to make him more like a normal person. Eventually, both brothers joined the military. Chris's brother went overseas for service, while Chris, due to his mental issues, stayed close to their father. This continued until one day, they received news of their mother's death. Chris and his father, deeply affected, attended the funeral to pay their respects. However, their mother's current husband, unaware of their situation, angrily demanded they leave. Chris had a breakdown, leading to a confrontation with the family. Tragedy followed. The police who arrived at the scene shot and killed Chris's father. Chris was sent to prison, where he met the second person who would change his life, a veteran accountant who had served the Gambino family for 40 years. In the end, due to the inaction of the IRS, the old accountant was kicked out of prison and protective custody, only to be silenced by the Gambino family. After learning of this, Chris used a thermos to knock out a guard and successfully escaped from prison. That Stanley thermos must have been of good quality. I see he still carries it around. As they drove to the airport, Jack narrated the entire story, and Hannah listened intently, engrossed in the tale. What happened next? Hannah asked, offering a kiss as a reward for the story. Jack, savoring the moment, continued. After escaping, Chris tracked down the Gambino family's stronghold in Lavalette and killed 9 people, including little Tony Bazzano, avenging the old accountant. Raymond King, the IRS official whose inaction had led to the old accountant's death, was monitoring little Tony Bazzano and his associates at the time. Chris, after listening to his remorseful confession, spared him and walked away. That's incredible. I can't wait to meet that accountant. And Justin, is she really a top-notch computer expert? By the time Jack finished the story, they were already on a flight to Chicago. Hannah's sympathy for Chris had turned into admiration, making Jack a bit jealous. That Batman character, always with a stoic face and no culinary skills, what's so great about him? Justin is the best computer expert I've ever met. I even asked her to help you with the Kleiner Foundation matter. Jack had almost forgotten about poor Abby Ciuto, the goth girl. She had been too busy lately, probably because there was some movement in NCIS. He wasn't sure if this would lead to future interactions with the Navy. Traveling with Hannah, they couldn't settle for economy class. Since they were on a red-eye flight, first class was nearly empty, allowing them to share whispers and affectionate moments without interruption. The only downside was that Jack couldn't carry his gun. Checking it wasn't safe either, so he left his FK 7.5 at home. Chris's Pan America RV was practically a mobile armory, so they wouldn't lack weapons if needed. This time, the trouble Chris encountered was reminiscent of a movie plot Jack had seen in his previous life, though with some differences. According to the information Justin had sent, after they returned to Chicago, Chris decided to avoid overly dangerous clients. Especially after learning about Jack's extreme aversion to drug dealings, Chris chose to steer clear of money laundering for drug cartels, shifting his business to legal or relatively gray areas. For instance, he took on a small job auditing a high-tech company. This company, specializing in AI and prosthetics, was ambitiously preparing to go public. However, during an internal review, they discovered serious financial discrepancies. Chris, in just one day and night, traced the missing $60 million. But as he delved deeper, an unexpected event occurred: the company's CFO accidentally died. Now, Chris and a female accountant who discovered the discrepancies were being hunted. And so came the call that interrupted Jack and Hannah's evening plans. "I bet that girl is a beauty," Hannah speculated, showing the same curiosity Jack often did. Jack looked at the information Justin had sent, nodded, and handed his phone to Hannah. "She's not as stunning as you, but she's definitely a rare beauty, like a movie star. Just a bit short. I thought the height difference between the hunters was already striking. Won't it be awkward if they're together?" Hannah playfully punched him. She had envied the height difference of that couple, thinking she was too tall to look cute hanging on Jack. His comment made her mind wander to all sorts of imaginative scenarios. The plane landed at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. Jack and Hannah rented a Malibu and headed to Aurora, 60 kilometers away. This time, Hannah drove while Jack, sitting in the passenger seat, called Ray King. Though the original plot was filled with intense action, where Chris single-handedly took down enemies, Jack wasn't about to treat this as some infinite game world. He couldn't go on a killing spree and expect to walk away unscathed while maintaining his career as a cop. Jack, with his cautious nature, always thought about how to explain his income sources, even when dealing with something like Bitcoin. To live openly and legitimately in a world governed by stable societal rules and logic, he wanted to keep his background spotless. At least until he built a robust network to protect himself and those around him, he couldn't afford to act recklessly. Luckily, with the IRS's help covering his tracks, Jack could avoid trouble. Despite the sly old man's veiled threats and inducements to join the IRS, Jack was tempted but reluctant to give up his system. Maybe it was Jack's intervention triggering events earlier or some other factor causing a butterfly effect. Even though the old man had started planning his succession, for now, Jack didn't have to worry about dealing with a politically correct female investigator, as depicted in the original plot. While Jack couldn't join the IRS, he wondered if he could introduce a trustworthy successor to King. This would benefit both him and Chris, especially since the IRS was one of the top-tier agencies for dealing with aftermaths. Jack hung up the phone and let his imagination run wild. At worst, he could help King extend his tenure, giving him more time to secure his position. He even had a good candidate in mind. Chapter 115, Too Many Critics, No Mood for Titles. The drive from the airport to the Holiday Inn in Aurora took about an hour. As they pulled up to the luxurious five-star hotel, Hannah poked Jack with a puzzled look. "Are you sure Mr. Wolf didn't give us the wrong address? Why would someone on the run stay in such a high-end hotel?" Jack shrugged. "They're actually in the presidential suite. As a poor man, I find it hard to understand you rich folks. Maybe it's because the towels are more comfortable in luxury hotels. Chris wants to impress the girl." Justin's message had read. Jack didn't need to hear her voice to sense her irritation. Her message was full of angry emojis. Knowing the close, almost familial bond between Justin and Chris, Jack reassured her while knocking on the door. Even if Chris finds someone special, it won't change your relationship with him. Trust me, you don't want him to be lonely forever, right? This is a big step for him, and as his closest family, you should encourage him. Jack typed rapidly on his phone, and Hannah, curious, peeked over his shoulder. After a few moments, the door finally opened, and a rather disheveled Chris appeared. "Hannah, my girlfriend. This is Chris, the accountant." Jack introduced them briefly and then handed his phone to the still-dazed Chris. "Justin's mad at you. You'd better smooth things over with her." "Ah." Jack noticed a petite woman lying awkwardly on the couch. He glanced back at Chris, who was now frantically typing on his phone, and teased, "Don't tell me you rented a presidential suite in a 5-star hotel and just sat on the couch all night with a pretty girl." The sound of their entrance woke the girl on the couch. She sat up quickly, wiping the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. Judging by her reaction, Jack could guess their previous position, likely chatting late into the night until she fell asleep on Chris's lap, and he, inexperienced in such situations, had probably sat there stiffly the whole time. "Jack Tavaler. Just call me Jack." Jack extended his hand. "Dana. Dana Cummings. Are you friends of Chris?" Dana nervously wiped her right hand on her hip before shaking Jack's hand. It was clear that Dana also had some social anxiety, making her a good match for Chris. Jack briefly explained his relationship with Chris and refrained from teasing him further. Today's dose of jabs was enough. He just pointed to the corner of Chris's mouth, indicating a trace of lipstick still there. When Chris returned from washing his face, Jack updated him on his conversation with Ray King. "He'll come over from DC as soon as possible. Just try not to make too much of a scene, it's hard to clean up afterward." Chris nodded expressionlessly, though it was unclear if he truly took it in. "We analyzed the attack last night. The missing $61 million from Lifebots Corp. Reappeared on their books. They did this to inflate their cash flow for the IPO. Dana, the company's cost accountant, was the first to notice the discrepancies. After I found the missing profits, their CFO died at home from an insulin overdose. Soon after, both Dana and I were targeted." After hearing Chris's analysis, Jack nodded. "So, you think your new employer is behind the attacks?" Contrary to Jack's expectations, Chris shook his head. "I'm not sure. The person who hired me for the audit was Rita Boone, the sister of Blake Boone, the CEO of Lifebots Corporation. I need to talk to her first." Jack remembered the original movie being a bit jumbled, and he didn't recall all the details clearly. What stuck in his mind was Chris fighting his way into the villain's home, having a dramatic showdown with his brother, and then casually killing the boss, likely the Blake Boone Chris mentioned, not Rita. Jack's main concern was sticking close to Chris to prevent any unintended consequences due to the butterfly effect. He didn't want Chris accidentally killing his own brother, leading to a tragic outcome. Having brought Chris and Justin to a near-normal state, he couldn't afford to lose such valuable allies over a misunderstanding. "All right, let me think." Jack scratched his head, feeling he was becoming more adept at plotting from behind the scenes. "Hannah, can you help protect Dana? When Ray King arrives in Chicago, meet up with him and go to Lifebots Corp to secure the records and documents Chris reviewed as evidence. Can you handle that?" Dana nodded eagerly, and Hannah patted the Glock on her waist, signaling she was ready. "Find me a weapon. After dark, we'll pay a visit to Ms. Rita Boone to confirm who's behind this." Jack looked at Chris as he spoke. The accountant naturally completed his thought, then we'll put a bullet in his head. It's the best way to end the threat to Dana. Jack saw a sparkle in Dana's eyes, almost starstruck. It seemed saving a damsel in distress was indeed a foolproof way to win affection. Dana appeared ready to fall for Chris any moment now. Jack sighed. "All right, let's go with that." Jack had already done his best to elevate Chris's emotional intelligence from negative to positive, and it was unrealistic to expect more. Remembering the original movie where Chris casually gave away a Pollock painting worth millions as a gift, Jack thought few women could resist such a straightforward gesture of affection. Leaving Ray King's contact information with Hannah, Jack cautioned both women to stay safe. He and Chris then left the hotel for Chris's house in Plainfield. The small house in front of them was more of a garage than a home. As Jack walked inside, he found most rooms were empty, without any furniture. The bedroom didn't even have a bed. "Are you still sleeping in your RV?" Jack asked, surprised. Chris shouldn't have sleep issues anymore. Chris was busy checking the house's surveillance footage on his computer. Embarrassed, he explained, "I don't use this place anymore. Justin and I are planning to move to LA. I'm worried about her relapsing and want to stay close to you. We've bought a farm near the San Fernando Valley. Professor Hubble is handing his research institute over to his students. He'll be living with us. Are you sure he won't be worried about this?" Jack fiddled with a mounted M134 minigun in the corner of the room. Its terrifying rate of 6,000 rounds per minute covered most of the house's backyard. Chapter 116, Brotherly Reunion. "You can keep it if you want. You know, there was a time when I really lacked a sense of security," Chris said, his speech now almost indistinguishable from a regular person. Jack hesitated. Although he probably wouldn't need it, the idea of having something like this just for show was quite appealing. "Maybe after I finish setting up my basement armory," he replied. In his line of work as an FBI agent who would soon be dealing with countless serial killers, stocking up on weapons for self-defense seemed perfectly reasonable. After submitting his resignation to the LAPD, Jack contacted David Rossi and received fantastic news: the FBI had decided to establish the new BAU unit headquarters in LA. This meant he didn't have to worry about moving and could continue paying off his mortgage. Why the BAU was being set up in LA? Jack suspected it might be because there were more serial killers on the West Coast, though it was really just the author's convenience. Given that future cases would involve traveling by FBI jets, he didn't need to overthink the reasons. Chris had a taste for a high-quality life, evident from the Australian Wagyu steak stored in his fridge. Jack melted a pat of butter in a pan and cooked the steaks while watching Chris organize his stockpile of equipment. 2 sets of heavy interceptor body armor, each with a front and back level IIIA ballistic plate, a scope $417 Hong Kong dollars, a modified Barrett M82A1, probably the same one Chris had used before, 2 MP5A2 submachine guns favored by SWAT teams equipped with laser sights, a variety of handguns, several Mk3A2 offensive grenades, and M84 flashbangs. Jack smirked. To an outsider, it would seem like they were preparing for a full-scale war. Better put the Barrett away. The FBI might come sniffing around, Jack suggested, recalling the big stir caused by the last incident with the Southern Front. The Bureau had been investigating that gun ever since. Chris nodded thoughtfully, repacked the Barrett, and then pulled out an AWM chambered in 7.62 mm, explaining seriously, the ones attacking Dana were professional mercenaries. They had excellent gear. Jack agreed, flipping the steak onto a plate, then reached for a handgun. "I'll take this one." He chose the SR-1M Vector, also known as the Pit Viper, a powerful pistol second only to the FK7.5 Chris had previously given him. Testing its weight in his hand, Jack loaded the 7 and 29 armor-piercing rounds into the magazine. Given his proficiency with handguns, he wasn't worried about missing his target. The real concern was whether the bullets could penetrate the mercenaries' body armor. Since this wasn't a regular police mission, facing professional mercenaries required a lethal approach: 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the head, no mercy. After lunch, Jack retrieved a sleeping bag from Chris's RV and found an empty room to rest and gather his strength, awaiting nightfall. As night deepened, they set off, driving to the upscale apartment where Rita Boone lived, as per Justin's intel. Rita Boone was surprised by Chris's late-night visit. Even with a gun pointed at her, the 60-something-year-old woman vehemently denied any involvement in the CFO's death and claimed no knowledge of the attacks on Dana and Chris. "So, it's clear that the real mastermind is your brother, Blake Boone," Jack asserted. Rita Boone shook her head furiously, unable to believe her brother was capable of such actions. Just then, there was another knock on the door. Jack, sensing an opportunity, motioned for Chris to hide with him. It seemed a witness was about to walk right in. "Hello, Braxton." Chris emerged from the bedroom, facing his younger brother but lowering his eyes, unable to meet his gaze. Braxton Wolfe, who had come to silence a witness under his employer's orders, froze in his tracks, his hand halting midway to drawing his gun. "Chris? Is that really you?" Braxton couldn't believe his eyes. "I've been looking for you for 10 years, and now you just show up," as if we saw each other only yesterday. His eyes welled up, voice raspy, pacing nervously in front of Chris. I'm sorry. I should have found you sooner, Chris said, his voice laden with guilt, staring at his feet. What is going on here? Rita Boone, baffled by the scene unfolding, couldn't grasp what the three men were doing. Don't interrupt their touching reunion. I'll explain everything later, Jack pulled her aside, ready to observe the unfolding drama. You must be glad to see me, right? Braxton's stare bore into Chris, filled with mixed emotions. I am, really. Chris took a step forward, only to be grabbed by the throat and shoved against the wall by Braxton. I have one question for you. Why did you and Dad attend that funeral? Braxton's voice was filled with pain and anger. She abandoned us, don't you remember? Do you not remember? The brothers began to grapple, Braxton executing an over-the-shoulder throw, slamming his taller but unresisting brother to the ground. Dad's death is your fault, you know that. Braxton cried as he continued to pummel Chris. I'm sorry, truly, Chris tried to speak but was cut off by his brother's wrath. Sorry? What good is sorry? You damned freak, it's all your fault. Braxton hammered at his brother's head, eventually collapsing beside him, exhausted and sobbing. You don't care about me. You never cared about your little brother. I've been supporting you all these years, but you had to go see that woman. Braxton lay beside his brother, muttering. You should have come to me. You shouldn't have gone to him. You should have come to me. If you felt you had to see her one last time, to attend her funeral, you should have come to me. You know I would always support you. I'm sorry, brother. I'm no longer a freak. I'm better now. Someone helped me, and he also helped Justin. Chris pointed to Jack, who was watching nearby. Chris is stable now. He's even fallen in love recently. It's true. You guys continue. Don't mind me. Jack felt awkward, waving sheepishly at the now upright Braxton. Who is he? Braxton asked, confused, looking at Jack. Jack, a cop, Chris replied quickly, sensing his brother's instinct to draw a gun and grabbing his hand to stop him. A friend, a very important friend to us. Justin can talk to people normally now. Really, I can take you to see her. Chapter 117, Preparing for the Raid. Braxton had vented his emotions and finally calmed down. The two brothers could now talk things over. Aren't you curious about where I've been all these years? Braxton asked. In Europe. I know. Justin checks your whereabouts every few months, Chris replied. Chris nodded. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. Some of my clients are dangerous. Thinking it might be misunderstood, he quickly added, I don't deal with those clients anymore. I plan to get in touch with you soon. After moving to LA with Justin, I bought a small farm there. Jack coughed lightly, signaling that they had an unrelated third party present and that they should save the reminiscing for later. Rita Boone still couldn't believe her own brother would try to kill her. Even though Braxton, the would-be assassin, had confessed, she suspected the two brothers, who looked nothing alike, were playing a trick on her. Jack was equally exasperated. With one being the Punisher, and the other Batman, although historically they've teamed up, their styles were indeed quite different, much like DC and Marvel. Fortunately, Rita was still sensible enough to grasp the situation, especially after Chris fired a shot into the couch with his P-14 fitted with a silencer. Rita obediently put on her coat and followed them back to the Aurora Holiday Hotel. At the hotel, Braxton drew a sketch on paper outlining Blake Boone's security layout at his villa in the suburbs. This is the entrance, the hallway, the living room, and the bedroom. The study has surveillance equipment connected to 12 cameras around the villa, along with motion and infrared sensors. There are 12 mercenaries, 8 inside, 4 outside. 2 snipers with anti-infrared cloaks are on the roof at the southeast and northwest corners. Jack was stunned by the meticulous security. These are all your men. Can't you just find an excuse to make them leave, he asked, realizing he couldn't handle this on his own. Braxton shook his head. I was hired through intermediaries. Those mercenaries were assembled by the other side abroad. Blake prepaid $5 million, so these men need to be taken out. Otherwise, this won't end. He looked at Chris and added, You said your clients are dangerous. I've always felt my life is pretty dangerous. Chris looked at his brother, slightly exasperated. You've improved. After returning to the hotel, they handed Rita Boone over to Hannah and Dana for safekeeping in the adjacent room. They began planning their final solution. Chris rejected his brother's idea of going back undercover to coordinate from the inside. Instead, he preferred a direct assault on Blake Boone's villa, thinking it seemed simpler. Jack didn't object. After all, the mercenaries were essentially war dogs, devoid of human rights. As their discussion ended, there was a knock on the door connecting the two rooms. Dana's voice came through, "The IRS gentleman is here." Jack got up and went to the other room, where he found Ray King sitting wearily on the sofa. The old man waved a tired greeting. "He's here too?" King asked, pointing to the other room. "Do you want to see him?" Jack smiled, pouring a glass of whiskey for King. Ray King hesitated, then shook his head. "No, it's better if we don't meet." "What's your plan now?" Jack asked, pouring himself a glass of soda and sitting down across from King. "It's tricky. Blake Boone plans to spend $10 million to resolve all issues and has already prepaid $5 million, including silencing all witnesses." Rita Boone, sitting nearby, shifted uneasily on the sofa. She now realized that her brother really intended to kill her just for money. "What are you going to do?" King inquired. "This isn't a choice. Blake Boone opened the gates of hell, and we need to help him close them," Jack replied, secretly adding that they'd push him through before shutting the door. Rita Boone couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She wasn't a naive girl like Dana. She understood that the situation had escalated beyond a simple resolution, even one involving the police. "Keep an eye on him, but try to keep it quiet," Ray King sighed, though he knew Chris too well. This was a man who had once single-handedly taken down the Gambino family's stronghold. King had been in the surveillance van then, and by the time he realized something was off and rushed in with his gun, all he found were corpses. Jack looked troubled. "It's not about keeping an eye on Chris. Blake Boone is just too far gone." "Blake hired a team of 12 mercenaries," Jack added, seeing King massage his temples in frustration. King sighed deeply. "I'll notify the Chicago Police Department. The IRS will coordinate a raid." Jack stood up with a grin. With King's cooperation, he felt more confident about the upcoming operation. "Wait a minute. Aren't you forgetting something?" King called out as Jack was about to leave. "Huh?" Jack looked confused. "You promised me something over the phone," King reminded him. Jack glanced at Dana sitting with Hannah, both girls getting along well. He had been considering introducing Dana to King for some time. Dana, though not as brilliant as Chris, was a genius with numbers and had a bit of a thing for Chris. King would surely understand his hint. "What do you think of her?" Jack asked. King looked puzzled. "Isn't your girlfriend already in the FBI?" "I'm talking about the other one. She's an accountant and might just fit." Jack subtly hinted, and King nodded in understanding. "All right, take care of things here." "I need to get back to LA, Jack said. With the IRS director overseeing matters, safety was no longer a concern. He figured he'd bring Hannah along. She was a sharpshooter, possibly even better trained than he was after her recent 22-week FBI program. Chapter 118, Fire in the Hole. Back in the adjacent room, Jack laid out the plan. Hannah's excitement was palpable. This redneck girl, who had killed 2 beasts before reaching adulthood, clearly had a bit of a violent streak. Jack was glad to see her enthusiasm. He had left the LAPD a month early to visit McGrath Town with Hannah before heading to Quantico for training. Jack was anxious that while he was away at training, Hannah might get into trouble. Rather than wait for the justified storyline to unfold, he decided they should strike first and finish it. With the Wolf brothers joining them, they even had backup if needed. After all, what kind of crime syndicate could stand against the combined force of Batman and the Punisher? This would serve as a rehearsal and also their first team-up since Jack and Hannah were separated for several months. At 2 a.m., outside an isolated villa in the Chicago suburbs, Jack, armed with an MP5A2 submachine gun and wearing a black ski cap, leaned against a sturdy pine tree. He was scouting the area, waiting for the right moment. Chicago's spring nights were chilly and often windy, but tonight they were lucky. The temperature was below 10 degrees Celsius 50 degrees Fahrenheit with almost no wind, a rarity in the windy city, perfect for sniper operations. The villa faced a small lake to the south and was backed by a vast pine forest. Jack and the others planned to infiltrate from the northeast and northwest corners in pairs. Interestingly, the Wolf brothers seemed to have a fondness for Barrett sniper rifles. Chris's Barrett M82A1M was vetoed by Jack, but Braxton provided the latest Barrett MSRAD, which Hannah eagerly took. This left Chris with his AWM, looking a bit disgruntled since his M82A1M couldn't match the MRAD's quick-change barrel feature. Position 1 ready, Hannah's voice crackled in their earpieces. Then came Chris's voice, position 2 ready. Braxton and Jack gave their confirmations. The plan was straightforward. Chris and Hannah would first eliminate the 2 snipers on the roof. Hannah would continue providing cover with her Barrett MSRAD while Chris ditched his AWM and joined Braxton. The brothers would then draw attention and engage the enemies inside, while Jack would attempt to reach the roof, and together, they'd clear out the remaining hostiles. As for the surveillance cameras, they planned to ignore them. Their objective was to eliminate all targets and retrieve the surveillance hard drives afterward. With Ray King's official support, they had ample time. 3, 2, 1. At Hannah's countdown, both snipers concealed under camouflage cloaks on the roof exploded in a burst of blood and lay still. At less than a kilometer away, the bullets from both sniper rifles were supersonic. Given that Braxton had provided their positions, the fate of the rooftop sentinels was sealed. As the distant gunshots rang out, 2 mercenaries acting as roving sentries outside barely had time to react. Hannah's Barrett MSRAD took down one, his body split in half by the waist, trailing a long streak of blood and guts behind him. The other mercenary quickly ducked behind a decorative tree, but a second later, a .416 bullet punched through the slender trunk and into his head. Using a high-powered sniper rifle felt like overkill. Within a minute, a third of the 12 mercenaries were down. Hannah, who hadn't claimed a single kill in her 2 years as a patrol officer, had now taken 3 lives. Hannah continued firing, though now for suppressive purposes. Every window within her view received at least 1 shot. Finally, the remaining mercenaries inside the villa responded by turning off lights that could expose their positions. Due to design considerations, some corridor and wall lights had switches outside. After losing another man to these lights, no one dared to risk their lives to turn them off anymore. Jack received the go-ahead signal. Chris had joined Braxton, and the 3 moved from their hiding spots, with Chris and Braxton alternating fire to draw the enemy's attention. Jack sprinted through the camera blind spots Braxton had mapped out. With gunfire everywhere, no one would notice the sensor's alarms. Realizing that staying inside wasn't a viable strategy, the mercenaries threw several smoke grenades from the villa's side. A foreman team rushed out, using parked cars as cover and engaging the Wolf brothers. Hannah, losing her angle, ceased fire after her 3rd magazine change. Jack sensed she was nearing her limit. Despite the Barrett MRAD's reduced recoil, after firing almost 30 rounds non-stop, her shoulder must have been hurting. While the mercenaries' attention was focused on the Wolf brothers attacking from the northwest, Jack stealthily approached the villa's northeast side. He paused, catching his breath. The heavy interceptor body armor with groin and neck guards he wore weighed nearly 22 pounds, excluding other equipment. Sprinting almost 300 meters in near sprint speed was exhausting. After surveying his surroundings, Jack nimbly vaulted over a decorative low wall and climbed up the villa's side, reaching the rooftop. Careful to remain silent, he approached the northwest corner where the Wolf brothers were battling 4 mercenaries, now down to 2, Jack noted. The 3 remaining mercenaries inside the villa attempted to reinforce their comrades, tossing more smoke grenades. Jack grinned and pulled out 2 Mk3A2 offensive grenades. Although these were better suited for indoor use due to their reduced shrapnel, he had no choice. He pulled the pins and dropped them into the smoke below. Before the grenades exploded, Jack opened fire with his MP5A2, catching the mercenaries off guard as they were focused on the Wolf brothers. As the mercenaries fell, the grenades went off, sending 2 more flying. Chris and Braxton moved in, finishing off the downed men. Now only 1 mercenary and Blake Boone himself remained. Chapter 119, Maybe We Should Take a Bath First. The battle ended in just 10 minutes, but what followed was almost comical. The last remaining mercenary, his spirit broken, walked out of the villa with a gun to an old man's head. "Let me go, and you can have this guy." Jack jumped down from the second-floor rooftop, performing a roll to absorb the impact, and watched the scene unfold in disbelief. It seemed these so-called mercenaries were not only subpar in skill but also lacked intelligence. Without a word, Braxton stepped forward and shot the mercenary in the head. The old man flinched and took a moment to process what had just happened. Staring at the two brothers standing before him, he seemed to struggle to recognize them. "It's you, the accountant. I hired you. And you, the hitman. Why? I paid you. And who the hell are you?" he demanded, pointing to Jack, who had most of his face covered by a ski cap. "Men, women, children, I gave them hope, helped them overcome disabilities. Do you know what that means? Once the company goes public, we'll make billions. This money will fund neural prosthetics, nanotechnology." The old man rambled on, trying to justify himself. Chris, unimpressed, drew his P14. Bang. A bullet hole appeared in Blake Boone's forehead, and he fell to the ground like a lifeless log. "Because you wanted to kill Dana," Chris said, holstering his gun. "Dana? Who's Dana?" Braxton asked curiously. He didn't know the full story and assumed his brother's rampage was due to being targeted for assassination. "A pretty girl. She was the accountant who first discovered the financial discrepancies in the company," Jack chimed in, putting his gun away and calling for Hannah to come pick them up. "Really? You finally have a girl you like?" "I was worried you'd be alone forever," Braxton said sincerely, happy for his brother. "You should go clean up the scene," Chris suggested, his tone slightly awkward as he tried to divert the conversation. Although it was dark, his body language and abrupt change of topic betrayed his discomfort. The earlier firefight hadn't rattled him nearly as much as this topic did. Braxton returned shortly, carrying 2 hard drives. Hannah pulled up in Chris's F-150 Raptor, with Chris's AWM sniper rifle stowed in the back. The three of them climbed into the truck, leaving the chaos behind. Jack, sitting in the passenger seat, struggled to remove his heavy gear, handing it piece by piece to Chris in the back seat. When he got to the Russian-made Viper handgun, he hesitated but eventually passed it over. Jack admired the powerful pistol, but like the FK 7.5 Chris had given him earlier, the ammunition it used was too distinctive. Both the 7N29 armor-piercing rounds and standard bullets were too conspicuous. Jack decided he'd look for a less conspicuous gun, perhaps a 1911 model similar to Chris's P14, without serial numbers, fitted with a practical Osprey silencer for his off-the-books operations. By the time they reached the hotel, dawn was breaking. After such a significant operation, Jack and Hannah couldn't linger, and the Wolf brothers needed to make their exit as well. Chris had an easy plan: head back to Plainville, hook his Clear Breeze RV to the F-150, and hit the road. Justin had already deregistered his old identity and activated a new one. Braxton planned to accompany his beloved brother to the farm in LA for a while and eventually bring Justin and his daughter over. Jack and Hannah were preparing to leave. It was Sunday night, and Jack, ever the diligent patrol officer, had to be back at work on Monday. Chris stood in front of Jack, head down, and after a long pause, offered a sincere thank you. Though socially awkward, Chris wasn't unintelligent. He understood that Jack had taken significant risks to help him, bringing along his FBI girlfriend and participating in the final battle. Jack, never one to hide his intentions, laid out his plan and formally invited Chris to help him take down the Kreiner Foundation. Braxton enthusiastically agreed to assist. Though they had only reunited for less than a day, he sensed a notable change in his brother, all thanks to Jack. Chris, while still a man of few words, had become more willing to communicate and even praised Braxton, a rare occurrence. Braxton's past had been tough. Growing up, he had endured their father's brutal training alongside Chris and had been left alone in Europe as an adult. He didn't learn of their father's death until afterward, and after Chris went to prison, he avoided Braxton altogether. Now, unexpectedly reunited and learning that Chris had been planning to find him, Braxton was deeply moved and genuinely grateful to Jack, viewing him as a benefactor. They arranged to meet in LA in a week. Jack and Hannah took their rental Chevy Malibu to the airport. By the time they arrived home that evening, Hannah was barely able to keep her eyes open. Unlike Jack, she couldn't function on just a few hours of sleep. But when Jack carried her to bed and began to undo her shirt, Hannah woke up, wide-eyed and staring at him. "Maybe we should take a bath first," she suggested weakly. Jack poured some medicinal oil into his hand, warmed it up, and firmly massaged the bruised spot on her right shoulder. "What are you thinking? You fired 30 rounds from a Barrett. Do you want to lose your arm?" "Ouch," Hannah winced. "Good, it should hurt. What did you learn at Quantico? What if we needed backup later?" Jack's hands worked her shoulder with gentle pressure. Tears nearly welled up in Hannah's eyes. Her whole body felt weak, except for her defiant mouth. "I could have managed another magazine," she retorted. "On the way back, I noticed you could barely lift your right arm." Feeling a bit of pity, Jack discreetly used a bit of healing magic as he continued massaging, especially as Hannah leaned into him, her body pressing close. "Go back to sleep. I'll stay with you." Jack felt a twinge of restlessness. Despite the recent intense battle, his old issues weren't entirely resolved. Hannah didn't speak, just gazed at him with large, watery eyes, her lashes fluttering. Knowing she was exhausted, Jack hesitated to make her suffer more. They stared at each other until Hannah's eyes started to show a hint of sadness. Finally, unable to hold back, she bit him playfully. Chapter 120, Beating Up the Enemies. It turns out that the system's skill upgrade requirements include hidden conditions. Jack had always been puzzled why his poker skill remained at the entry level, despite his diligent practice and his two teachers' proactive cooperation. However, just a moment ago, his skill suddenly upgraded from entry-level to proficient. Could it be that the upgrade conditions for some skills include not just proficiency but also the number of people involved? Pulling his thoughts back, Jack got up from the bed, tucked the blanket around the still sleeping Hannah, and went to take a shower. He prepared breakfast in the kitchen, finished his portion, and checked the time. It was still not even 7 in the morning. Estimating that the sweet girl wouldn't get up before noon, he left a note by the breakfast and headed out to work. "Looks like you're in a good mood today. What's up?" Had a fun time with Hannah these past few days. On their routine patrol, Lucy, who was getting bored in the passenger seat, started prying for some gossip. Jack glanced at her sideways and admitted frankly, "Yeah, it was great. Have you decided on the new precinct you're transferring to?" Lucy shot him a fierce glare, annoyed that he brought up the topic she was dreading. It was strange how every LAPD precinct, which previously seemed short-staffed, suddenly didn't need anyone anymore. The closest available option was a tiny precinct with fewer than 20 officers. If she transferred there, she and Tim would only be able to see each other on weekends, which was unacceptable for the love-struck couple. "I'm stopping the car, there seems to be some trouble up ahead." Jack saw some familiar figures slipping into an alley at the street corner and slowly pulled over. "What's going on?" Lucy asked, puzzled. "Just spotted some old acquaintances. Going to say hello." Jack smiled oddly. Indeed, they were old acquaintances, some gang kids wearing hoodies who used to hang around the South downtown area. For some reason, they were now in the Wilshire district. Before Jack officially entered the police academy, these kids used to bully him. During that time, he was worried about getting a criminal record and being unable to become a police officer, so whenever he saw these punks, he would avoid them. Back then, with his scrawny frame, even Hannah could easily pin him down. Sometimes, when he couldn't dodge and got caught, all he could do was curl up defensively, and each time he'd have to fork out some change to lessen the beating. After joining the LAPD, Jack didn't forget the grudge but realized that crossing districts to seek revenge would only cause trouble for himself. Moreover, as his skills improved and his future looked bright, dealing with respectable people, his perspective naturally shifted. But now, just as he was about to leave the LAPD, fate had brought these guys in his path again. It was time to settle the score. Seeing Jack stop the police car and start taking off his uniform inside, Lucy looked both anxious and curious, staring at him intently. "What are you doing?" "Those 3 gang kids used to hang around where I lived. Now that I've run into them, cover me while I go undercover for a bit." Jack stripped off his uniform and police gear, revealing a t-shirt underneath. He tugged at it casually to make the loose shirt less likely to show his physique and to cover the badge at his waist. He then removed his shoulder holster and handed over the heavy FK 7.5 and his Glock to Lucy for safekeeping, keeping his head low as he entered the alley. Lucy, nervously trailing him, peeked into the alley from the entrance to observe what was happening. Jack walked into the alley, head down, pretending not to notice anything, until he was just a few feet from the three guys engrossed in their shady business. Then he stopped abruptly as if suddenly realizing something was off. The guy with the spiky mohawk dyed red and yellow noticed Jack first. Seeing Jack's terrified look, the gang leader seemed a bit confused, as if Jack's face rang a bell. "Hey, boss, isn't this the kid from the street who used to run the grocery store?" The gang leader's sidekick had a good memory, recognizing Jack instantly. The second guy, a curly-haired black youth, licked his lips disgustingly and pulled out a butterfly knife from his pocket, flicking it open and shut as he and the first guy flanked Jack from behind, cornering him. "Jack, right. Long time no see. I heard you sold that little grocery store and skipped town. Looks like you're doing well now." With the sidekick's reminder, the leader also recalled who Jack was. He pulled out a dagger from his waistband, smirking coldly as he walked up to Jack. Seeing that the three were close enough, Jack dropped his act. He grinned savagely and suddenly launched himself at them. His right hand came down like a hammer, flattening the second guy's nose. The second guy screamed and collapsed to the ground. The first guy, still processing what happened, was kicked in the gut and flew backward, smacking into a wall before sliding down, barely conscious. The leader, taken aback, saw his two buddies crumpled on the ground, one groaning in pain and the other knocked out cold against the wall, head lolled to one side as if dead. "You know martial arts?" The leader's hands shook like he had Parkinson's disease, his knees buckling as if about to give out. He wanted to run but didn't dare. He brandished the dagger at Jack, waving it erratically. Jack, expressionless, stepped closer, mimicking Bruce Lee's iconic stance, yelling, "Ya-ya." The leader flinched, almost dropping the knife in fear. Before he could blink, Jack delivered a perfect spinning side kick, sending the knife flying out of the leader's hand. "Help! I'm sorry. Please, spare me." The leader's legs gave way, but before he could kneel, Jack grabbed him by the collar and hoisted him up. Damn it. If apologies were enough, what would we need the police for? Jack pounded the leader's face repeatedly, holding back just enough to avoid killing him. Even so, the leader's face soon became a bloody mess, his eyes and mouth askew, blood streaming from his nose. Satisfied, Jack exhaled deeply, then lifted the leader upside down, shaking him by the legs like a rag doll. Lucy, worried Jack might go too far, had already caught up. She picked up a bunch of scattered bags from the ground, filled with pills, leaves, and even a small packet of white powder. Glaring at the still smiling Jack, Lucy called for backup over the radio. Jack had taken out his frustration, but he'd exercised restraint. Despite their brutal appearance, the three were only lightly injured, not even needing an ambulance. They could be hauled back to the station directly, and being street thugs who couldn't afford lawyers, there was no worry about complications. Chapter 121, The Thrilling Commotion. They say fortunes change every 30 years. Never underestimate the young and poor. Damn, that was satisfying. Jack changed back into his uniform, almost humming a tune in his joy. Fortunately, when he transmigrated here, he had the mindset of a middle-aged man. Despite the proverb about patience being tough, he had managed to suppress his anger for 2 or 3 years. Had he transmigrated 20 years earlier, with his younger temperament, he might have gone for a knife and tried to settle things violently. Who knows what would have happened, but he certainly wouldn't have become a cop, and the system would likely have been ruined along with him. After leaving the station and resuming patrol on the streets, Lucy glanced at Jack with newfound admiration. She knew he had come from a nearly slum-like neighborhood, but she had never really thought about it in depth. The LAPD isn't a small-town police department. Along with high pay, it rigorously screens personal records. Even minor juvenile offenses can disqualify an applicant, and that standard hasn't changed. Jack's journey from such a rough background to becoming an LAPD officer was nothing short of a small miracle and certainly inspirational for many from similar circumstances. They hadn't been driving for long when the command center radioed in. 7A26, there's a disturbance reported at 25616 Wilshire Boulevard. Can you respond? Jack, in high spirits, grabbed the radio and replied, Command center, copy that. We are en route to respond. With that, he turned on the siren and sped towards the location. Wow, this is quite the disturbance, Jack said, slightly taken aback by the scene before him. 25616 Wilshire Boulevard was home to a well-known bridal shop. As soon as he parked, Jack could see through the large glass windows that two apparent customers were engaged in a fierce fight over a wedding dress. If Jack had to describe the scene, he'd use either indecent or delightful. The two brides-to-be were somewhat scantily clad. The fight seemed to have started in the fitting room, so they were wearing very little. Jack couldn't understand why someone would wear a thong to try on wedding dresses, but due to the pulling and tugging, everything that could be exposed was on display. The whole scene was quite titillating. Jack opened the shop door, gesturing for Lucy to go in first while he turned on his body cam. He had a feeling many people would want to get their hands on the footage from his and Lucy's cameras today. Police. Lucy turned her head upon entering and noticed Angela and Tim, who were supposed to be off duty today. Tim was holding his phone, recording the scene. I was collecting evidence, Tim said sheepishly when he saw his girlfriend. To his surprise, Lucy wasn't bothered by that. Instead, she excitedly gossiped, "Are you helping Angela pick out a wedding dress?" Angela, looking thoroughly amused, chimed in, "You two should finish your work first. Ladies, please calm down." Jack stood at a distance, not daring to approach. Although he had seen his fair share of messes in nearly a year as a patrol officer, this was a first for him. He wasn't sure if getting involved would lead to complaints. "Angela, help me out here. Dinner's on me." He had no choice but to seek Angela's assistance. Off-duty officers have the discretion to intervene in crimes if they choose, at least in this country. Lucy couldn't handle both women on her own, and although Angela was pregnant, she was still under 5 months along. Subduing one of them would be easy for her. Just as Angela was about to step in, one of the brides-to-be let out a scream and bolted for the door. "I must have that dress." "Ah." As Jack was contemplating how to stop her, Tim casually extended his foot, tripping her. Oof. Despite her ample cushioning, that long slide across the floor looked painful. "You're under arrest." Jack quickly handcuffed her, grabbed a veil from a nearby rack to cover her body, and noticed that the commotion had attracted a crowd outside. Many were filming through the windows. "So, you really are helping Angela pick out a wedding dress? I didn't peg you for the male best friend type." After stuffing the frantic bride into the back of the squad car, Jack finally had a moment to tease Tim. Tim rolled his eyes. "Angela sent me a 911 text early this morning, urging me to come here. When I arrived, I found out she was just having a meltdown because she couldn't find a dress that fit her well due to her pregnancy weight gain. Should I be glad I'm not off today?" Jack glanced at Angela, who seemed quite cheerful. Given her condition and the scene with the other two brides, he could somewhat understand her emotional swings. After all, she was pregnant and a bride-to-be, with all the extra stress that entails. "Hey, Jack, why isn't Hannah answering my calls or messages?" Angela, who had been chatting with Lucy, noticed Jack looking her way and waved to get his attention. Her phone might be dead. She was probably still asleep this morning. Jack watched the two women whispering and occasionally glancing his way with knowing smiles. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Back at the station, after adding 2 more brides-to-be to the holding cells, Jack and Lucy were about to head out for lunch when the command center radioed in again. 7A26, armed robbery in progress at Copley Trust Bank, 28700 Wilshire Street. 7A15 is on scene and requests backup. It's John and Neela. We need to hurry. Jack floored the gas pedal, and the police car screeched as it sped towards the bank. 1 street away from their destination, Jack turned off the siren. Rounding the corner, they saw John and Neela's squad car. John was crouched behind the steps outside the bank, peeking inside. Neela, armed with a rifle, was positioned across the street, using the police car's hood for cover while aiming at the bank. Jack got out, signaling Lucy to grab the AR-15 from the trunk and join Neela. He then ran over to John's position. John was reporting in on his radio, male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a black leather jacket, beige shirt, blue jeans, and a mask. Armed with a handgun. 7 hostages on site, including 2 tellers and 1 security guard. As John was about to continue, the situation inside the bank suddenly changed. For reasons unknown, the security guard, who had been lying on the floor, suddenly sprang up and started wrestling with the robber. Chapter 122, John's verbal jousting. Sensing the situation was escalating, John rushed forward. "What the hell? How much does the bank pay you to risk your life like this?" Jack mentally cursed the reckless security guard as he pulled out his Glock and followed. "Don't fire your weapon. 2 hostages are escaping," John shouted into his radio while moving forward. Jack took over the task of guiding the 2 fleeing hostages to safety, ensuring they didn't cross into the line of fire where Neela and Lucy were positioned across the street. When Jack finally entered the bank, he saw the black security guard lying on the ground with a bloody head. He quickly scanned the scene. Thankfully, it appeared the guard had only been hit with the butt of a gun, causing a superficial wound. John had his gun trained on a column in the lobby. The robber, his mask ripped off during the scuffle with the guard, was hiding behind it, clutching a money bag with one hand and pointing a small revolver at a terrified female bank teller who had fallen to the ground. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. At this range, he was confident he could shoot the gun out of the robber's hand. "Stay back, or I'll shoot." The robber was clearly agitated, his hand shaking violently as he held the gun. After a long time, John's knack for negotiation was finally put to the test again. "No, you don't want to shoot. Things have gotten out of hand, but we can work this out." "No way. If you don't let me leave with this bag, she's dead." Jack found the situation peculiar. The robber appeared to be of Latino descent, but he was dressed in a Gucci leather jacket and wore a Hermes belt. Was he here to rob a bank or attend a business meeting? Could this be another middle-class person driven to desperation? Feeling something was off, Jack decided to let John handle the talking for now. After all, it wasn't right to always steal the spotlight from the veteran. "You go ahead and get the others out," Jack said as he helped the black security guard to his feet. The fewer people inside, the better, to minimize the risk of anyone getting hurt. "Officer Harper, Officer Chen, be advised. The remaining hostages are leaving to avoid any accidental injuries," John reported over the radio. Once the last hostage was clear, Jack had a strange sensation, like someone was watching him. He held the radio to his shoulder, pretending to speak while glancing subtly in the direction of his feeling. He noticed a dirty van parked by the steps where they had come in. There was a head in the driver's seat that quickly ducked into the back when he looked. When they arrived, the van's driver's seat had been empty, so Jack hadn't paid much attention to it. But now, knowing someone was hiding and watching the bank from that suspicious spot, he couldn't ignore it. Feigning ignorance, Jack nonchalantly turned to walk towards John, speaking softly into his radio. "Harper, do you think that van at the curb with the Nana Primo's Pizzeria sign could be an accomplice's getaway vehicle?" Harper's voice crackled back shortly, "Can you see someone inside?" "The windows are tinted from my angle, I can't see in. I noticed someone peeking out towards the bank. Any chance we can secure the area without alerting them?" Jack couldn't be sure if the person in the van was truly an accomplice or just an overly curious bystander. But anyone sane wouldn't park in a spot with a direct line of sight to armed police officers and potential stray bullets. Despite the fact that LA has its fair share of eccentrics, the average citizen has learned the basic, common sense to avoid such situations after living through daily reports of gunfights. "No problem. I'll have spike strips set up at both ends of the street. You and John be careful in there," Harper assured him. Jack responded with an "okay" and moved closer to John, listening to him continue his verbal assault. Perhaps it was his recent experience in the heat of battle, or maybe he just had confidence in the situation, but Jack found himself strangely calm, reflecting on how this world had truly toughened him up. By now, John had not only gotten the robber's name but was also reminiscing about his own past. "Hey, Cooper, funny thing, this isn't my first bank robbery. The last time was before I became a cop. I had just gotten divorced, and I had a lot of personal problems. Stopping that bank robbery, or rather, trying to, was what gave me direction in life again. I got hurt, but no one else did. That's how I ended up becoming a cop. You still have a chance to stop this before anyone gets hurt. You don't want your family to be heartbroken over you, do you?" John's knack for talking people down was something Jack doubted he could ever match, even if he became a master in psychology. Luckily, he knew another way to resolve things convincingly. As long as his aim was precise and quick enough, he could persuade the enemy before they even had a chance to react. The robber, Cooper, seemed moved by John's words. "Listen, I don't want to hurt anyone, but I have no choice. You understand? It's because of my family." John responded with empathy, "I get it, but your family would want you to come out of this alive. Let the woman go first." Cooper hesitated before saying, "Listen, if I do that, you have to let me go safely." "Ah." John replied honestly, "That's not likely. The place is surrounded by cops. More are on their way. Your best option is to put down the gun and end this." "No, you don't understand." Desperation filled Cooper's eyes. "She can go, but you have to let me leave. My wife and daughter are waiting for me. Without this money, they'll die." John was baffled. Are they sick? Do they need money urgently? Jack hated cryptic talk. Misunderstandings in movies and shows often stem from vague explanations, making you wonder if the writers were either lacking in intellect or doing it on purpose. It insulted the audience's intelligence. Impatient, he cut in, "Let the girl go first. We won't force you out, and we can talk things through. You can see John's a good guy, and I'm not too bad either. We'll do our best to help you." Cooper wavered, then waved his revolver to signal the bank teller to leave. She scrambled to her feet and rushed out, bent over in relief. The situation was unexpectedly under control, which brightened Jack's mood. Without a hostage, Cooper posed no real threat. Given his trembling grip on the gun, Jack was confident he could empty his Glock's magazine into Cooper before he could react. With the immediate danger over, Jack allowed himself to relax a bit and even contemplated letting Cooper talk a bit more to understand his situation better. Cooper, now isolated, was no longer a threat. Jack was sure he could neutralize him if necessary. He signaled to John to keep the conversation going, intrigued by what more they could learn. Chapter 124, Interstate 10. The three of them took their positions. In the living room, the three dimwits were still shouting at each other. One of them, a curly-haired guy, was brandishing a gun and yelling that they should just kill the mother and daughter right now. "LAPD, hands up." Jack and his team burst in, shouting. The curly-haired man, startled, instinctively tried to resist, lifting his gun only halfway. Bang. A bullet hole appeared in his forehead, and he collapsed backward onto the couch. The other two screamed and dropped to the floor, clutching their heads. At the same time, the front door was kicked open. A tense-looking Tim charged in, relaxing only when he saw that it was Jack who had fired the shot. Back at the Wilshire station, Jack looked a bit uneasy as he watched Cooper's family huddled together, crying. He swore he hadn't fired the shot to get administrative leave, but that's how things turned out. He was supposed to leave his position in 2 weeks, and he had a week of leave saved up. Now, with an additional week of administrative leave, he could effectively take a vacation until his official resignation date. Captain Gray, half amused and half frustrated, was dealing with a lot of personnel changes. The new recruits hadn't even arrived yet, and now Jack was leaving early. He had to figure out how to coordinate with other precincts for extra manpower. Meanwhile, Inspector Anderson was finalizing his transition, busy with his upcoming promotion, but Tim had taken over some of his responsibilities, preventing Gray's mood from getting even worse. After a day of rest at home, Jack was already getting restless. His original plan was to fly with Hannah to Atlanta in 2 weeks to meet the Wolf brothers and then head to a remote town to take down a counterfeit operation. Now, with nothing to do for half a month, he felt it was necessary to adjust his plans. Just yesterday, his half-finished system had undergone another update, causing quite a commotion. He couldn't access it for a whole day, and just when he thought his system was done for, a notification popped up, saying the update was successful. This system update gave Jack the final push to get out and take a trip. He decided to take action. After his routine visit to the Hunter couple the next day, Jack shared his idea with Hannah. "I want to take a road trip along Interstate 10. Hannah, who was enjoying Jack's custom-built luxury bathtub for the first time, leaned back lazily against him, surprised by his words. "Interstate 10. You mean driving from the West Coast to the East Coast?" "Yeah. I've lived in LA for over 20 years, and apart from flying to Chicago twice, I've never driven out of the state. With this much time off, I want to see more." Jack had done his research during the day. Driving along Interstate 10, there were plenty of interesting places to visit, like the Grand Canyon, the Mississippi River, Roswell, famous for UFOs, and Tombstone, the iconic setting for many Hollywood westerns. Hannah looked conflicted. But I promised to help Angela with her wedding. It's a battle between her and Wesley's mom, and I have to support her. Jack's fingers formed a tiny figure that danced through the valleys, climbing mountains and sliding down slopes, before he finally spoke. I'll call you when I reach San Antonio, and we can meet up at the airport. Hannah flipped over, pinning Jack's little figure under her. She looked at him intently, waiting for him to continue. You mentioned your parents are buried at your family ranch. Why don't you take me to see them? Hannah's excitement was palpable as she threw her arms around his neck. Are you serious? This isn't a marriage proposal. I told you I won't propose until I'm 30. Before he could finish, he got a sharp elbow to the chest. Since receiving the IRS bonus, Jack had more funds to work with. Deciding to go on the road alone, he knew he had to prepare thoroughly. After a buying spree, Jack's Firebird was packed to the brim. The small trunk and the cramped back seats were filled with supplies. From knives, compasses, fire starters, and sewing kits, to solar-powered flashlights, climbing ropes, rigging, tents, sleeping bags, plastic buckets, camping stoves, and even a dozen extra-large, thick condoms, not expecting any wild encounters but knowing they had many uses, such as makeshift waterproof bags. And given the reputation of the southern states, he armed himself with extra magazines and 2 boxes of ammunition for his FK 7.5. Hannah also gave him a collapsible Raven crossbow, which was perfectly legal in the USA. Jack tested it in his backyard, and despite not being skilled with it yet, he was impressed by its accuracy and power. After spending half a day checking his beloved Firebird, Jack was ready to hit the road. He chose Interstate 10 because it was the shortest east-west interstate in North America, spanning just over 2,400 miles, nearly 4,000 kilometers. Starting in Santa Monica, it stretches across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and ends in Jacksonville, Florida. The best part about this route is its straight path, making for easy driving. Jack sat in the driver's seat, looking ahead at the road that extended in a straight line, disappearing into the light blue horizon. Jack left at 10 a.m. If he drove at a normal speed, he would reach Phoenix, the capital of Arizona, by evening. But he wasn't in a hurry. His first planned stop was Joshua Tree National Park, a natural park spanning 2 deserts. As he drove east, the temperature gradually rose. About an hour out of town, he passed the famous resort town of Palm Springs and soon found himself surrounded by endless desert. After another half-hour of driving, he arrived at his destination for the day, Joshua Tree National Park, dotted with massive rocks and the iconic Joshua trees. Joshua trees are actually a type of yucca plant. In his previous life, Jack had seen them in China, where they looked a bit like agave plants and only grew as tall as a person. But here in their native North America, they could reach up to 50 feet tall, towering and impressive. Unfortunately, it was already May, and the flowering season was over, so he couldn't see their blooms. But he wasn't here for the trees, he was more interested in the numerous boulders scattered across the Mojave Desert. Chapter 125, An Encounter with a Russian Climber. Joshua Tree National Park is home to a place called Hidden Valley. This area is filled with numerous rock formations and cliffs of varying difficulties, making it a paradise for rock climbers and renowned as one of the top 10 climbing destinations worldwide. Jack parked his car at a nearby campsite and shouldered his backpack, filled with climbing ropes, pitons, and other gear. He climbed to the top of a cliff about 10 meters high to experiment with his skills. Jack wasn't particularly a climbing enthusiast, he was here to test the changes in his system after the recent update. The entire skill panel had transformed dramatically, turning into a densely branched skill tree. Under the professional skills section, many new large icons had appeared. For example, clicking on the vehicle driving icon revealed a set of smaller icons categorized into ground, water, and air vehicles. Clicking further into ground vehicles broke it down into small and large vehicles. Jack's original driving skill, Mastery, was now labeled as Small Vehicles, Mastery, while Large Vehicles was only at the beginner level. When he explored water vehicles, it was similarly divided into small boats, beginner, and large boats, grayed out, leaving him to wonder if an aircraft carrier would count as a large boat in the system. Air vehicles were split into fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft. Despite both being grayed out, implying he couldn't pilot either, it was amusing to think that knowing how to fly a fan with propellers might somehow qualify him to fly a jet plane. Did the system also consider the space shuttle as a fixed-wing aircraft? Fortunately, fields like forensics and psychology weren't broken down into countless sub-skills. Otherwise, considering the vast number of forensic disciplines, like trace evidence, footprint analysis, fingerprint identification, and psychology subfields, like microexpression analysis, psychological assessment, and behavioral analysis, Jack might have fainted on the spot. However, the update had its perks. Skills Jack had no knowledge of were previously invisible, but now they appeared as grayed-out icons with small progress bars beneath them. For instance, Jack's once stagnant rifle marksmanship skill, which was at Adept, now fell under the combat skills category, which included shooting, fighting, and special skills. Within shooting, Jack's current levels were handgun, mastery, rifle, adept, and bow and crossbow, beginner. Interestingly, the progress bar under rifle was already full. Jack's reason for climbing was to test the new climbing skill, now visible under special skills as a grayed-out icon. Last night, he read several professional books on rock climbing and rope techniques. Although the climbing skill remained grayed out, its progress bar was fully loaded. By observing the different progress bars for various skills, Jack had formulated some theories, and today he was here to verify them. At the top of the cliff, Jack hammered in 3 pitons, tied himself with a safety rope using a figure-8 knot he recalled from his readings, and rappelled down to the base, securing additional pitons along the way. He then attempted to climb the cliff barehanded. For someone with the strength to lift their body weight using just a couple of fingers, this posed no difficulty. All he needed was patience and caution. Upon reaching the top again, the climbing skill in his system upgraded to beginner, with the progress bar still full. He eyed another rock formation, about 30 meters high, a short distance away. This larger rock had a climbing team of 3 men and 2 women preparing at the top. When Jack approached from the side, 2 attractive, fit, blonde women in the team gave him flirtatious glances. In the May heat of the Mojave Desert, where daytime temperatures approached 40 degrees Celsius, Jack wore only tight-fitting knee-length hiking shorts, showcasing his impressive muscle definition on his bare upper body. Unlike the tanned Caucasians who risked sunburn to achieve a bronze glow, Jack was content with his ivory skin, which remained untanned despite his exposure, saving him the need for sunscreen. Returning their smiles politely, Jack passed by the group and chose a section of the cliff that protruded outward, likely the most challenging route. Using the same method as before, Jack hammered in pitons and secured safety ropes. This time, he carried additional gear like rock wedges, mechanical chocks, and rock hooks on his belt. Descending to the base, Jack started his second climb. This time, the difficulty was significantly higher, especially when he reached the outward jutting part of the cliff. His techniques were still clumsy, and he was unfamiliar with using the tools, but he brute-forced his way through to complete the climb. As Jack struggled over the edge of the cliff, a slightly calloused hand reached out to help him. Looking up, he saw one of the blonde women, the slightly older one, standing in front of him. "Thanks." Jack grasped her hand and used the leverage to pull himself up. "I'm Natasha, a student at UC California, from Moscow," the blonde introduced herself with a heavy accent and a bit of a tongue roll. "I'm Jack Tavler, but you can just call me Jack." Jack's system had updated its language tree as well, with over 60 languages, most of which were grayed out. After mastering Italian and Latin recently, he was now working on Russian, which had just reached the beginner level. Excited by his progress, Jack greeted her in Russian, "Zdravstvuyte, hello." Natasha's face lit up with a delighted smile, and she began speaking rapidly in Russian. Here's where the system's capabilities shone through. Despite being at the beginner level, Jack could understand most of what she said, though his responses were as hesitant and stammering as a novice's, and his rolled R's weren't quite right. During their conversation, Jack learned that the younger blonde was Natasha's sister, Talia. They came from a well-off family and were both excellent students at UCLA. Both sisters were avid climbers and quite experienced. When Natasha found out Jack was a police officer on a solo road trip during his leave, she looked at him with unconcealed envy. Jack didn't overthink it. The system had notified him that his climbing skill had upgraded to Adept, though the progress bar was now half full. Taking advantage of the conversation, Jack asked Natasha for more climbing tips. As she explained, he noticed his progress bar inching up slightly, confirming his theory. Skill upgrades in the system appeared to have hidden conditions. For a skill like climbing, progress seemed to be a combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Merely reading books wouldn't earn an entry level anymore. Hands-on practice was essential to elevate the skill further.